Good morning and welcome to the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. My name is Senator Suzanne Geist. I represent the 25th District in South Lincoln and Lancaster County, and I serve as chair of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. We will start off having members of the committee and the committee staff do self-introduction, starting on my right with Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Geist. Good morning. I'm John Frederickson. I represent District 20, which is in Central West Omaha.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wendy DeBoer. I represent District 10, which is in Northwest Omaha.
Mike Moser, I represent District 22. It's Platte County and most of Stanton County.
Bruce Bossman, District 23, Saunders, Butler, Colfax counties.
Barry DeKay, District 40, represent Holt, Knox, Cedar, Antelope, northern part of Pierce, and most of Dixon County.
To my right is our committee counsel, Mike Hibble, and to my left is our committee clerk, Caroline Nebel. Sorry, mental break. Sorry, Caroline. Also assisting our committee are our pages, Caitlin from UNL, who is a history major, and Natea from UNL, who is a political science major. Okay, she'll be back. This morning we'll be hearing a confirmation and a bill, and we'll be taking them up in the order listed outside the room. On the table near the entrance of the room, you will find the blue testifier sheets. If you're planning to testify today, please fill one out and hand it to the pages when you come up. This will help us keep an accurate record of the hearing. If you do not wish to testify but would like to record your presence at the hearing, please fill out the gold sheet on the table near the entrance. Also, I would like to note the legislature's policy that all letters for the record be received by the committee by noon the day prior to the hearing. Any handouts submitted by the testifiers would also be included as part of the record as exhibits. We would ask if you have any handouts, you please bring 10 copies and give them to the pages. If you need additional copies, the pages will be able to provide those for you. Understand that senators may come and go during our hearings. This is common and required, as they may be presenting bills in other committees. Today, testimony for each bill will begin with the introducer's opening statement. After the opening statement, we will hear from any supporters of the bill and then those in opposition, followed by those speaking in a neutral capacity. The introducer of the bill will then be given the opportunity to make closing statements if they wish. We ask that you begin your testimony by giving us your first and last name and spelling your name for the record. We will be using a 5-minute light system. When you begin your testimony, the light will be green on the table. The yellow light is your 1-minute warning, and then the red light, when it comes on, we ask that you wrap up your final thoughts. I would like to remind everyone, including senators, to please turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. And with that, we will begin with our appointment, Kirk Langer. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Kirk Langer. I am currently serve as the Chief Technology Officer for Lincoln Public Schools, which of course is the second largest district in the state, serving about 42,000 students these days. I have served on the NITC technical panel since May of 2002. Time is relentless in its passing, and I had to actually ask the legal counsel for the NITC, Rick Becker. I couldn't find emails going back that far to find out exactly when I started, and I couldn't actually remember. And he said, "You started then."
Mr. Langer, would you mind spelling your name?
Yes, I'm sorry. My name is Kirk, K-I-R-K. My last name is Langer, L-A-N-G-E-R.
Thank you.
So my memory did not necessarily recall exactly when it started, but when I did, I became acquainted with Walter Weir, who was the CIO for the University of Nebraska system, and Brother Decker, who was the CIO for the state in the years that came. And in working with them over several years, and then as each of them moved on in retirement, working with current CIO, Ed Toner, and working with Mark Aspirin at the university, and now Brett Blackman. It's been 20 plus years that have been interesting in all that I've learned. about the work that's done by the Nebraska Information Technology Commission, its technical panel, its ed council, and other pieces and parts of it. So with that in mind, I would just wanted to make a call out to some of those people I've worked so closely with and the opportunities I've had. I have served as the NITC Technical Panel Chair since 2018. Again, time is relentless in its passing. So in the number of years I've been doing that, that's been a different opportunity to be sure. Walter Weir encouraged me to accept his nomination as he left. I was a bit naive enough after all those years to think that I could step into his shoes. And the truth of the matter is I've spent the last several years trying to figure out how he did as much as he did. He was truly a wonderful public servant to the state, and I consider myself privileged to have been somebody he was willing to mentor. That gives you a brief history of my time with the NITC, and I would be happy to field any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? I see none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see Bruce. Senator Bostrom.
Thanks, Chairman Geist. I was just asking some general questions on, have you set on, I see August is when you're appointed, so then have you set into some of the meetings already, and what's your thoughts of those meetings?
Yeah, so I've sat in on a single meeting of commissioners. That was my first opportunity to become appointed with Senator Geist. I would say that the proceedings were approximately what I would have expected, given that as the NITC Technical Panel Chair, I would give reports routinely to the commissioners. So it's important work that's being done. It's happening both at the committee level, in the technical panel, and in the Ed Council. Then when the commissioners come together, it's an opportunity to take action on those things that have been brought forth by those respective groups.
How many times do they meet?
I would probably defer to Senator Geist. I couldn't tell you the exact number of times, to be honest with
That's
you.
fine.
Whatever the number was, I accepted willingly to serve in that capacity.
Understand. Okay, thank you.
I believe it's once a quarter.
Sounds right.
Yeah,
Sounds right.
yeah. I know I attended as well when they gave me they would give the request and you show up, but I believe it's once a quarter.
Yeah, our first meeting was over at Nebraska Public Media Building, and Senator Geist and I both did some dodging about trying to figure out how to get in there. As they were doing construction at the time. The most obvious path in was not the correct path. So that might, in some ways, describe a lot of what all of our lives we do in all of our lives.
Any additional questions? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any proponents for this appointment? Anyone who wishes to oppose this appointment? Anyone neutral? Seeing none, that will close the hearing on the appointment of Kirk Langer. Thank you. And with that, we will open on LB 683.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman Geist, members of the committee. My name is Mike Hibble. It's MikeHybl. I'm committee legal counsel, and I'm introducing LB 683 on behalf of the committee. LB 683 would propose four main changes to the broadband program administration for the state. First, it establishes the state broadband office. That office will be overseen by a director of broadband. Individual is appointed by the governor, confirmed by the legislature. The office is to be housed in the Department of Transportation. Administrative and budget decisions for the office shall be made by the director of broadband. The office will provide outreach, collaboration with interested parties, develop the state strategic broadband plan, coordinate state agencies on policy matters affecting the use of state and federal funding for broadband, ensure funding is used in a cost-effective manner, and then provide state advocacy for broadband issues on the federal level. Second, the bill transfers the responsibility for the state broadband map to the State Broadband Office from the Public Service Commission. Third change is it strikes a reference that the state broadband coordinator is to be funded from the Rural Broadband Task Force Fund. The bill also strikes language currently contained in the Broadband Bridge Act that any federal funds received shall be in addition to state general funds, and that federal funds may not be used as a substitute for general funds. The bill also does contain the emergency clause. I do have some handouts for you. The first is an amendment that I'm offering to you, AM 217. And on page 5 of the bill, line 30, it would strike the word received and substitutes the words designated by the governor. Currently, the statute provides a broadband bridge fund shall consist of money appropriated by the legislature and federal funds received, shall consist of money appropriated by legislature and federal funds received for broadband enhancement purposes. The effect of this change is the State Bridge Act fund shall consist of state appropriated dollars and any federal funding that has been designated by the governor to be administered pursuant to the Broadband Bridge Act. I have also another amendment, AM 246. This is an amendment that was prepared by the Department of Transportation, and they will be following me and can get into the details of that amendment. And then the last thing I have for you is that last week when I was just sending you out the summaries for this week's hearings, I forgot to include a copy of the governor's executive order that was issued creating the State Broadband Office through the executive order. This bill is kind of a follow-on to that to provide some additional details to that executive order. With that, Senator Geist, that would conclude my introduction.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Senator Moore.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could explain again this designated from the governor piece that is the amendment that you just handed out, that I don't even know if I have my hands on yet, but 217, there we go. Will that have the effect of allowing the PSC to hand out in the broadband bridge program any monies that the governor does not designate? Or what is the effect of that language?
I think the intent of the amendment is, as I understand the entire scheme, and hopefully there'll be testimony from the administration that'll cover anything I miss, is that the intent is that the broadband office that has been established will be responsible for the BEAD program.
Correct.
And that it will administer those grants, take over the mapping, that type of activity. The intent of, and that the intent further is the commission will continue to administer the bridge program and capital projects fund. That is currently in process. I think applications are due in the next week or 10 days, towards the end of the month. That we're already in process of capital projects fund. The current statute reads that the commission will administer any federal broadband funding. So the point of that amendment is to make it clear that the governor can take any of these federal funding sources and designate where he wants them to go, whether it's through the bridge program or through the broadband office.
And that would be any future, we have the BEAD, let's say there's a seed program.
If there's a BEAD 2 or whatever else.
Okay, BEAD 2 makes more sense than mine. So if BEAD 2 comes about, the governor gets to designate how that's divided out. Okay,
That would be the intent.
all right, thank you.
Any other, yes, Senator Decay.
If this office was created, the Rural Broadband Office, and go through a confirmation for a director through the governor, would that office and director, would they report directly to the governor, or would they have to go through the DOT? How's that process going to work going forward?
The bill is introduced as the director of broadband is appointed by the governor, serves the pleasure of the governor as a direct report to the governor. That the office will be administered through the Department of Transportation. They will provide office space, those types of things. The bill, as it's as introduced, says that the director will be responsible for the budget matters of the office. The DOT amendment makes a change in that, but I'll let them explain the need for making that change.
Okay,
But that's the intent.
thank you.
Are there any other questions in the committee? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any proponents for LB 683?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Geist and members of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. I'm Vicki Kramer, V-I-C-K-I-K-R-A-M-E-R. I'm the Director of the Nebraska Department of Transportation. I'm here to testify in support of LB 683. Access to affordable, dependable, high-speed broadband is essential to maintaining the high quality of life Nebraskans deserve. It's the intent of the Broadband Office to consolidate, coordinate, and organize Nebraska's efforts to expand and improve access to high-speed connectivity. Multiple agencies and industry partners have been working to support broadband deployment and access for the last decade. However, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, established under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, created a need to proactively assemble a structured entity to dispense incoming federal funds in an efficient and transparent manner. Through the Broadband Office, the NDOT is uniquely positioned to serve as a lead partner in managing the build-out of the broadband network in Nebraska for Nebraska's underserved and unserved communities. There is significant skill overlap with NDOT's existing duties and the duties necessary to effectively deploy broadband throughout the state. The department plans to capitalize off of these synergies, aligning resources to collectively achieve the governor's vision by assisting with statewide short and long-range planning, community engagement, permitting, right-of-way negotiations, procurement, contract management, and infrastructure development. We manage and execute all of these tasks simultaneously across multiple projects daily. The experience will be highly valuable given the timeline of BEAD and the need to effectively deploy and manage broadband funding. NDOT's demonstrated experience with federal funds can be leveraged to assist the Broadband Office in successfully managing and distributing funds. NDOT has vast experience distributing grant funding from multiple federal agencies, including the Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Transit Administration, the Federal Highway Administration, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. NDOT's local assistance divisions, technical assistance team has been working through the opportunities and requirements of IIJA to assist local governments over the last year. They are a team I intend to grow and synergize with the mission of BEAD. Technical assistance will create additional capacity to support local communities' efforts in deploying broadband. Transparency and accountability are also areas NDOT has experience with meeting federal standards. Our robust accounting and audit practices and processes can be mirrored and leveraged to streamline the establishment of reporting procedures required by grant recipients after the distribution of funds. Additionally, in-house geographic information systems capabilities and planning resources, as well as the established process for procuring consultant processes and services, will yield positive impacts on the development of the state broadband map and the federally required 5-year action plan. NDOT has a long history of robust community engagement with many experienced and seasoned staff who regularly work with communities on infrastructure plans, gathering input from key stakeholders, community members, and assisting communities with state and federal processes that affect and fund infrastructure projects. Partnership and collaboration will be vital to the successful deployment of broadband in Nebraska. NDOT has the capacity to scale the necessary resources to deliver on the development of broadband, while supporting the Public Service Commission and promulgating rules and regulations, managing and planning for the maintenance of the broadband network, and facilitate coordination among common broadband carriers. We'll work with PSC to avoid duplication of efforts and develop plans accordingly to ensure there is little to no interruption in the state's progress regarding broadband deployment. This includes the division of assignment of federal and state funds and ensuring grant cycles from different funding sources are managed in a way that maximize the funds awarded while continuing to progress towards the goals of efficiently distributing funds for broadband planning, deployment, mapping, and adoption activities. For funding and staffing, all BEAD funding will be transferred to the NDOT office. NDOT has also worked on a proposed amendment allowing us to fund the administration of this office as required by LB 683. Thank you for your consideration of these concerns and your interest in bringing broadband to more communities in Nebraska. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator DeBoer.
Thank you for being here. Wondering if you could, I don't know if you have AM 246 in front of you, but if you don't, I can read the language. On page 3, it says the Department of Transportation may, in its sole discretion, use state highway funds for projects to install, operate, and maintain fiber optic broadband or other similar technology when determined by the department to be in the department's best interest. This seems to give unilateral discretion to the Department of Transportation to use road money to build broadband. Am I reading that wrong?
No, Senator, that's not the intent. The intent is our ITS system, so our intelligent transportation system. So the different pieces of technology that link our roadways and provide safety features. That's what we're looking to do. So it's not being an ISP provider, but it is continuing to deploy ITS in a way that improves safety.
I'm not so worried about in the moment about the becoming an ISP provider, which I didn't think we would want to do anyway. It's more the way the language reads, and maybe there's an amendment or something that we can make sure it's a little more clear. It seems to suggest you could sort of move money that was intended for roads.
No, so no money. We already use roads money on ITS because it impacts our roadway system. So on our fiber optic, that's what we use. It's a direct correlation to our mission. So there's no commingling of funds. There's no BEAD funds that would go to roads projects. There's no roads money that would go to infrastructure deployment that isn't directly linked to transportation mission.
Got it.
And I'd be happy to provide information on how we do our program with ITS. We typically publish it within our program book so we can give the public access to what things we're doing in terms of modernization.
And do you know if there's going to be anyone else from the administration that's going to come and testify today?
I don't believe so. I believe you'll hear from PSC and a few others, but I don't believe they're in the
Okay, so then, thank you. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. Then I'll ask you a couple of these questions. Why are we taking all of these duties away from the PSC and putting them into the Department of Roads? It's a bit of a concern for me because it seems like we're going from an elected board to one unelected member of a Department of Roads. And so I want to know what and also the PSC has been operating our broadband bridge program for the last couple of years. I mean, this is the main question for me, right? Like, why this shift? Or has the PSC done something wrong that we don't know about? It seems like, I mean, the information we've gotten is that it seems like this is going very well over in the PSC. So I'm very concerned about moving away from an elected board, the Public Service Commission, that has experience with this to trying to start on a new program. They've been working on, I mean, I know they've been working because I've been talking with them about on the fabric mapping, on all of these other things for years. So here you go. What's the reasoning?
So I think it comes down to resources and scalability. So the DOT is already working under multiple programs within IIJA to allocate those funds. BEAD changes the game in terms of level of funds as well as requirements to the feds to report. That is a large job. It's not just, we're going to increase 10 FTEs just in the department, and we have resources to backstop the necessary information and requirements and training you would need to do that. You have a strategic action plan that is due in August that dictates how we're going to spend this funds. I would say that there's one organization in the state that can provide the level of support we need to be able to make sure Nebraska has the best use of those funds, and it's DOT.
So if they could demonstrate that they could do it, then like maybe there's some resources you're not available or you're not aware of or something like that. Let's play hypothetical world. If they could demonstrate that they could do it, shouldn't we keep it with the group that's already been doing it?
To me, I'm here to tell you what the DOT provides in this resource and in this conversation. I would argue that, again, the timeline and looking at where we have and the ability to procure a consultant and bring them on and set up the plan or to even be able to manage that in-house is troublesome. And we've already gone through multiple rounds of community action and stakeholder input to where dollars were on the table. And so my main task here is to provide Nebraska with an opportunity to make the best use of these funds. And my department can do that.
And you think that because you have had experience distributing federal road funds and funds of that nature?
So programs under IIJA. So there's unique requirements on the back end of these funds that you have to report. It's the technical assistance piece. It's understanding what communities and the challenges they have through all of the federal funds. So when they go do this, we all know that most of the communities across the state only have 1 or 2 people in their actual offices, if that. And so making sure that we can deploy technical assistance teams to do that. Most of our staff within the local assistance division already have direct linkage to those communities and can work with them closely. So again, going back to the scalability piece, I do feel that we're unique in that we can scale up to provide the support needed to get to the August action plan, as well as provide the back end of the funding in terms of transparency and audit practices.
Okay, that's helpful. There was another spot, sorry, give me a second. There's another spot I wanted to ask you about. Oh, yeah, so the strategic plan, you think that'll be ready by August if you all take over this position?
We don't have a choice. It has
Yes.
to be ready for August.
So do we have everything in place to hire someone? My understanding is that there was a similar attempt to create a broadband office in Oklahoma, and they have been unable to secure an individual for that position.
Mhm.
Do you have any read as to whether or not we would be able to get someone for that position?
So we opened up applications as soon as the governor announced his EO. We've gotten several qualified individuals, so I do feel we'll be able to get somebody on for the broadband office, but I don't think that those things are mutually exclusive. I think that we, under the administration, would be able to provide a strategic plan, even if we weren't able to get somebody on by March or April. We'd still be able to have enough knowledge and understanding of the needs and scale up that we could have a plan out. That's not concerning to me. It's value added if the sooner we get them here, but I think we can support it if not.
And what would be the method that you would use to work with the PSC? Because the PSC will retain the broadband bridge funds. So how will you work with them to make sure that, for example, if I'm company A, I might say, hey, I'm going to apply to both programs because we'll see which one I get if I get anything. How do you make sure there's not overlap, overbuilding, right? So you may get company A applying for the same area. There's a little bit of overlap in the area they're applying for with company B. Company B applies under the Department of Roads. Company A applies in the PSC. Now we've got one, part of the area that is being built over by one company over another one.
So there's a lot of policy issues in that conversation, more than just 1 or 2 questions, but I'm gonna address 2. So I think 1, the partnership piece is huge, but 2, it's why the map is so important. So the map will give us the ability to understand and articulate as well as overlay all of those different things. So it'll overlay where those unserved communities are, where those underserved communities are, who's active in terms of providers in that area, as well as who's providing what entity, whether it be PSC or it be DOT through B, is providing those services. And so the map allows us to make sure that it is consistent throughout. And so we'll be leaning on PSC over the next couple of months to make sure that the map does what it says it's going to do, and we can provide those services because it is pivotal to make sure that 1, applicants know where they're bidding, and 2, providers know what's available to them and what that actual service provides. So we're working through that. It's going to be a conversation. We've already set up multiple different ways to communicate with PSC, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Geist. Thank you, Director Kramer, for being here and for sharing your testimony. I think what we all agree on is how important getting this right is, right? I mean, I think broadband deployment is going to be key for our state, whether we think about this from a economic perspective with remote work, whether we think about this from education with remote learning opportunities, I think also from a healthcare perspective with, telehealth. And so I think this is a really important equity issue for folks in parts of our state who might not have access to broadband. I think it might really prohibit, as we move forward, their ability to compete and fully access, I think, necessary resources for success. So this is extraordinarily important to me, and I know a lot of my colleagues as well. One question that I have regarding this, and I know Director Kramer, you and I have talked about workforce a lot, and that's a big passion of mine too. And to sort of piggyback a bit on Senator DeBoer's questions is, this is such a niche expertise that's needed. I think when you think about the complexities of our state, the topography we have, the geographic location, the actual deployment of this. And so I do have some concerns about whether or not we will be able to identify an expert to take over this for a director's role, for example. And so do you mind kind of maybe sharing a little bit on your thoughts on that as well?
Absolutely. I can tell you that we've gotten several qualified applicants. We've done targeted outreach. We haven't just put it out there. We've actually gone after and recruited and headhunted a few people that we feel would be able to take this step and available. And so we're in conversation with a few of them right now. So we look forward to having an answer back, and I'll go into more detail with you in a closed door if you don't mind, Senator, about what that looks like.
Great. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, Senator Mosier.
So what's the relative size of the Public Service Commission versus the Department of Transportation? How many employees do you have compared to the PSC?
I'm not sure on the total numbers of the PSC. I do believe they're going to testify so they could provide that number. We're right around 2,200. Keeping in mind, we have different resources throughout the state that can help. We were talking through this a few days ago, and it's as simple as if you're having a public meeting, instead of having to send 3 or 4 people out the day before to get the room set up, I can have my executive assistant that works in the office out there come out, set the room up. She's already on staff with DOT, so that gives us additional help, while I use my public involvement staff to continue to plus up and work the community and do the materials. So instead of it taking me 4 people from the BEAD funding, I'm probably only using 1 person from the BEAD funding that's directly allocated to this mission, which allows me to have more meetings, more output, more outreach. Does that answer your question?
So it was more than I asked, but that's okay. Do you anticipate hiring more people?
I anticipate, so the 10 FTEs that were submitted to the FCC or to the NTIA FCC in terms of the BEAD plan, that will stay. That was part of our fiscal note. That will stay, whether it be a PSC. Not exactly sure what theirs looked like, but ours is 10. Based on other states, they range from 10 or from about 6 to 13 people that they have on staff doing this direct mission. So I assume I can take some of the requirements and some of the work off and put it on my other staff. I will say, just for transportation under other programs of IIJA, given the needs of local communities, the local assistance division will grow under my leadership.
Do you think that some employees of the Public Service Commission may want to transfer to the Department of Transportation to work on broadband?
So right now, there's 3 FTEs that are allocated to BEAD that are currently hired by the PSC.
So they're going to switch to DOT?
That is the intent.
Okay.
Obviously, I understand the sensitivities around that. And so we're working with the PSC to make sure that what was promised to the employee is honored and that it's a seamless transition.
Okay. You don't see a shift in the emphasis to get more done? You don't look at this as a way to push things forward more quickly than what the PSC has been able to do?
I look at this as a way to accelerate what we're doing currently by what I've looked at. So I know what it's going to take to stand up a program. We just went through this with the NEVI program, the electric vehicle program, and I know how difficult it can be to navigate the federal process, whether it be on grant funding, setting up a strategic plan, outlaying what that vision is, making sure that you have community outreach to it. It's not an easy plan, and it's not a 10-person plan.
Okay.
And so,
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Director Kramer. I'd like to start by saying you're throwing out a lot of letters, and I don't know what you're talking about. And so if you could actually say what these things are, because it's hard for me to follow when you say IIAJ. I don't know what that is. So first, could you tell me what IIAJ is?
So it's the infrastructure bill. So the same bill that the transportation department got increased funding of about 30% on their formula funds. it's a program authorized under that same program.
So IIAJ is the infrastructure, for the federal infrastructure bill. Okay, thank you. I will just say that we're not all technical experts, and so just to be mindful of that, I realize that you have more expertise on some of these acronyms, but it is a little hard to follow. Okay, so I'm going to kind of follow up on some of the questions that Senator DeBoer had. I have some concerns where it says the sole discretion. I guess I didn't feel like we really got an answer on that. That's a red flag for me, because there's a may here. The Department of Transportation may use highway funds, et cetera, but in its sole discretion, is that something that the department is willing to have struck from this?
We can work through that.
Okay, because
It's the intent, and we talked through this, is making sure that we can operate at our discretion to use the opportunity, if you have it, to put in ITS. That's what we're looking for.
sure.
And that's the intelligent transportation piece.
I think generally speaking, the intent of the legislature is not to put in restrictive language on how you operate, but putting in such broad language is a little bit concerning. Another concern that I have that I want to give you the opportunity to speak to is Senator DeBoer mentioned that the Public Service Commission is a elected board, and the Department of Transportation has a greater latitude than really any other department in the state, because your funding is not reliant on the legislature's approval. And because you have your own sort of pocket of funding, we basically have a very different relationship with your department than we do with any other state agency. So moving something that is under an elected board to a department that has far less oversight than any other state agency, I think you can see where that would cause some pause, if you want to speak to that.
I can. There are key requirements under the program that we're discussing of the BEAD. So the BEAD is all of the federal money that was authorized by IIJA. And so there are key requirements for stakeholder engagement under that, very similar to what we have for our transportation projects through NEPA and public involvement. So anytime you do an environmental portion of a transportation project, you have to do a public outreach portion for it. And so there's very similar requirements. To your point, I understand the need, but I will tell you that you'll have multiple opportunities to be either represented in your official capacity or as just members of your community. We will seek that output because we are required to, and we need that output to make sure that the solutions we would be providing or asking industry to provide and providers to provide need to meet the actual needs of the community, or we won't be actually serving the requirements around the money, because it requires us to be unserved and then underserved.
Okay.
Does that?
Yeah, that does. And then in reading through the original language, not the amendment, it does in a lot of areas just strike the Public Service Commission and put in the Nebraska Broadband Office. And so beyond just creating this BEAD program, it does seem that we are moving the responsibility of the Public Service Commission to the Department of Transportation. And I think, I don't know if it was Senator Mosier or Senator DeBoer that asked, but the PSC cannot do this. I understand that you have the argument for being able to do it more efficiently, but is the Public Service Commission not capable of doing this, not able to do this? This is a big move for us to make, and I'm just curious why we would make this beyond, and I appreciate efficiencies, I think that they're important, but if that is the only reason, perhaps we need to reevaluate our reasoning.
So there have been key outreach from other states that we've been watching in terms of what's been done to make sure that we get the most amount of money possible under the federal rule. So we've been watching that as one way to gauge efficiency. I will let the PSC speak to what their efforts that they've been doing in terms of getting ready for the distribution of BEAD.
The fiscal note does reflect that they have a contract that they would have to cancel if we made this move, so.
I believe it could be transferred. I don't believe it would be canceled.
Oh,
That
okay.
hasn't been decided.
Okay.
So in working with NTIA, it's our understanding that much of the progress that has been made can be moved over to the broadband office. So there wouldn't be a loss of services. We wouldn't be starting from scratch. We would be building off of what the PSC has already done. Understanding that the scalability of what they've done versus what they're going to have to do in the next year is drastic. So though you may have seen continued planning and progress, which we applaud PSC for, that it's not reflective of what the next year looks like.
And I just would like to state that this is a committee bill, and I apologize for the number of questions, but I was not asked to be a co-sponsor of the committee bill, which I'm not sure why, but that's not for you to speak to, but I normally would not have so many concerns on a committee bill that I was a co-sponsor of, so thank you.
Are there any other questions? I do have a couple. And I think you partially answered one of my questions, which was to explain the relationship that you anticipate having with the PSC moving forward, since they do have some FTEs that are already hired and they've done some mapping and contracts. And so if you would just flesh out for us a bit what your anticipated moving forward looks like.
I think the vision is a strong relationship, understanding that my role in the broadband piece is not a forever role. And as we bring the broadband director on, their future may be where they have some synergy, even more synergy with PSC, or they have a home there. We don't know what that looks like. It depends on how the funding and what the requirements are and how far we get with BEAD funding. And so I look at it as we can provide support to PSC, and we can, while they focus on other things that are within their mission and privy, this is a very active area where there's multiple different programs and requirements that are being stood up. So if we can take this off of them, since we have so much experience executing federal funds, it's in everyone's best interest.
Mhm. And then I have one other question about the language in the amendment that is in the middle of that third paragraph. It talks about the department is further authorized to enter into either solicited or unsolicited public-private partnerships or to use alternative project delivery methods. And I'm just wondering, does that imply that you would be applying for other federal funding other than BEAD to
Yes,
utilize?
we would not use BEAD for our own fiber. We would use highway funds for the deployment of our fiber, and what we would use our fiber for is to connect our own infrastructure.
Mhm.
So as we look at the future of transportation, what's required to have both smart infrastructure, B2B, different elements of a connected autonomous vehicle needs, right? As well as the different elements along our roadways that create a more safer environment, whether they be shutting down interstates, barriers, or other things. That's what we need fiber for. So this would allow us to use state funds and our federal funds to do that, to deploy those activities.
So just to be clear again, and I know you've been asked about this, but just to re-clarify, this whole paragraph has nothing to do with BEAD funding.
No.
This is just you being authorized to use federal highway funding to advance the projects that you're,
Yes.
okay. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you for your testimony. Any other proponents? Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Geist and members of the committee. My name is Sarah Meyer. That's spelled SARAHMEIER. And I'm an attorney at Rumbold Ledke Law Firm. And I'm here to testify in support of LB 683 on behalf of the Nebraska Rural Broadband Alliance, the NRBA. I have been asked to provide testimony in my capacity as the NRBA's legal counsel on broadband matters involving state and federal regulation and funding. So we understand there's more work to be done to prepare this bill for final passage, as evidenced by the recent DOT amendment that was presented here this morning. And we respectfully request to be a part of those collaborative efforts. And so I will offer our comments on LB 683 briefly and section by section. So as to Section 1, the NRBA fully supports the establishment of the Nebraska Broadband Office. Nebraska needs a leader which is singularly dedicated to setting and implementing bold broadband policy and strategy. The NRBA appreciates the proactive approach the governor and this committee have taken on broadband policy implementation. The drafters of Section 1 are to be commended for thoughtfully and thoroughly outlining what will be critical responsibilities of the Broadband Office. Collaboration at all levels will be imperative, as will strategic planning. We can't afford to continue to cobble together broadband infrastructure. Rapid, large-scale deployment will be essential, and we have to be smart about it. Other states and regions are competing for funding as well as resources, such as fiber and labor, and we will be competing with them as well. As to Section 2 and the mapping responsibilities laid out, in my capacity as the NRBA counsel, I have actively been working with Oliver Borchers-Williams of the Southeast Nebraska Development District in consultation with the NTIA and in collaboration with the broadband coordinator and the PSC to ensure the federal government is aware of significant shortcomings in the new federal broadband map as related to actual coverage availability and service locations in Nebraska. We are finally seeing results from these efforts, and we wish to see this momentum continue. The priority of all Nebraska stakeholders is ensuring the accuracy of these federal maps. Accurate maps at both the federal and state levels are absolutely critical. They will have a significant impact on the allocation of BEAD funds distributed to Nebraska and will help us in determining our deployment strategy moving forward. As has been mentioned earlier today, accurate maps will also aid in any sort of collaboration between the agencies in coordinating efforts of the BEAD and bridge programs. As to Sections 3 and 4, the NRBA believes that the legislature should determine what agency is best suited to administer grant programs for broadband infrastructure. LB 683 appears to direct BEAD funding through the Department of Transportation while leaving state bridge funding and federal ARPA funding to be administered by the Public Service Commission. Having two state agencies administering funds for similar purposes will create duplication within state government, but our concern is the burden it will place on applicants for grant funding. Dealing with two separate agencies, the potential of two different application processes, and the uncertainty of running questions by two different sets of staff will create undue costs on the applicants, diverting resources and distracting them from the core aspiration of helping to design and build a broadband network throughout the state. In short, one-stop shopping would be a great benefit to everyone involved. Should the grant funding be moved entirely to DOT, it would have the benefit of freeing up the PSC the needed time they need to focus on addressing NUSF and other issues that are critical to large-scale, rapid deployment of a sustainable network. Essentially, the way we see it is that the PSC has a critical role in maintaining the safety and sustainability of our broadband network that needs to be built out here in the next 5 years. So in conclusion, the NRBA supports the creation of a strong broadband office to lead collaborative efforts to design, build, and sustain infrastructure that is capable of providing all Nebraskans with affordable access to the broadband services critical to all facets of our personal lives and commerce. The NRBA urges you to advance LB 683. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Geist, and thank you for being here. I was thinking about what you said, and I appreciate your comments on the two agencies and sort of the undue burden that might do. I'm thinking about how, we're not the only state who's going to be obviously looking to implement broadband. And if we have folks who are looking for bids, if there is sort of unnecessary complications seen in our state, that could sort of decentivize maybe wanting to come here or prioritizing Nebraska as a place to do business. So I appreciate that. I did have a question about, you mentioned in Section 2, the idea of accurate federal maps for this. And so I'm curious, would you be supportive of sort of accountability for what's advertised in terms of speed services around broadband? Or is that what the implication is there? Or?
That's a very good question. I think the NRBA would be, so first and foremost, our priority is having an accurate map. And part of that is being able to determine the accurate availability of service that is available in certain locations. Also the accuracy of the locations that are serviceable And so part of that is ensuring that advertisements are accurate, but I don't know that we would go so far as to comment on any speculative position right now, other than that we want accurate maps because that is critical for determining where money will flow to and to how we build out projects and what our un- and underserved locations are.
Sure. Thank you.
I have a question. You spoke about duplication and being concerned about that. And then you alluded to having a strong position for the coordinator. Would you explain what you're thinking? Are you suggesting all the funding go to this coordinator, or are you supporting the decision of having the division as it currently is, or is currently projected?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The NRBA has, members of the NRBA have participated in the Broadband Bridge program over the last couple of years. It's been a very good program. I think the point we're trying to get across today is that having to do a similar process to two different agencies for grant money for the deployment of broadband is duplicative, both on the industry side and on the government side. And we would prefer, as an industry, to have one agency to go to for grant applications. We think the legislature is best suited to determine which agency that needs to be, but we would prefer that there be one source for grant funding.
Understood. So both state and federal under one or the other?
Yeah, because that's, they're doing one function for deployment of broadband, and applications will be similar yet different, given the different requirements of the program, the strings attached. So yes, we prefer one agency.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Senator Decay.
Good morning. I apologize, I didn't hear your answer very well to Senator Frederickson, but in section 2, we talked about private parties to create, improve, and maintain the mapping. Would there be any obligate or any problem working with private or public entities that already have a mapping structure in place as far as being able to expedite projects into the rural areas with that mapping process that's already in place? Or what's your thoughts?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, I would say it this way then, like from, your different power districts in the state, they have meters that go out to every customer. That mapping's already in with AMR. Would there be a problem working off of those maps to figure out where broadband needs to be and how it gets there and do it most efficiently and cost-effective manner?
Again, I'll go back to, I think we want to make sure that the maps are accurately displaying the available service speeds at certain locations and the accuracy of locations that are serviceable. Primarily because this is what the federal maps require, and we want to make sure that our state maps similarly reflect and also provide maybe more information as to what our actual broadband network looks like in the state. I don't want to speak to certain technical capabilities of the maps because I'm not a map technician or an engineer, so I don't want to speak to that point. But really, we need to make sure that the maps are accurate so that we can actually deploy funds where they need to go, especially for determining locations that are un- and underserved, so that we can meet the requirements of the BEAD program.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other proponents? Good morning.
Morning. Chair Geist and members of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee, thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning. My name is Julie Bushell, spelled Julie Bushell, and I'm the president of Ethos Connected, formerly known as Page Wireless. Ethos sees LB 683 and the creation of the Broadband Office and a Director of Broadband that sits in the Governor's Cabinet as transformative for rural Nebraska, agriculture, and our state's economy. For a handful of years, policy has focused on rural broadband, but that term doesn't mean the same to all. Traditionally, policymakers have focused on getting adequate broadband speeds to small towns across our state. That is what the federal USF fund, USDA Reconnect, RDOF, and BEAD funding, and recent state grants have all focused on, and rightly so. Every person in Nebraska deserves broadband access, and it's a necessary goal for the survival of our rural communities. There's a bigger picture to rural broadband that's been in the state's blind spot, and that is why Ethos is so excited about the possibility of a broadband office. Agriculture is the #1 industry in our state. We are seen as the global leaders in food production, and we are the leaders in the sustainable production practices we use to do that. Over the last few years, we have worked with stakeholders in the agricultural supply chain, from seed companies to large retailers. They have all made clear that they favor data-backed, verified information and are willing to pay a premium on products that are shown to be grown in a sustainable and humane way. Here in Nebraska, that is what we do. But without sufficient producer-owned data to back that assertion, our ag products will be second choice to those that have data to drive their value-added premium. Ethos believes connectivity is the foundation to putting the power in the hands of the individuals, communities, and specifically the ag producers that we serve. Over the last 4 years, we have constructed North America's first statewide LoRaWAN network here in Nebraska. We have covered the state with a network that connects cropland, livestock operations, villages, and rural businesses. We know through on-the-ground experience, connectivity is critical to increasing on-farm revenues, retaining the next generation of ag leaders, and to allow Nebraska to finally tell our great story of how well we do agriculture. A broadband director who takes into consideration all perspectives of what rural broadband means comes at a critical time in ag industry's technological evolution. Precision agriculture is happening now all over the world. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to prioritize our largest economic driver in the state and secure our global leadership. A fresh and focused perspective on connectivity and outside-the-box thinking with a rural governor's support makes now the time. For these reasons, Ethos Connected supports LB 683. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? I do not see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning. My name is Emily Haxby, E-M-I-L-Y, Haxby, H-A-X-B-Y. I am from rural Gage County. I'm a 5th-generation farmer, a wife, a mother of 4 children. We have both row crops and a cow-calf operation, and with livestock, that typically means that we don't get a vacation, and the concept of sleep has eluded us. I also serve as the vice chair of the Gage County Board of Supervisors, which gave me the opportunity to lead the Gage County Rural Broadband Project that served many rural locations within our county. I know how important broadband is to rural residents across the state, especially our farmers and ranchers. I'm here today to testify in support of this bill as I applaud what this committee and our governor has done in creating the Nebraska Broadband Office. This has been done in many states across the country, including Colorado, Minnesota, Maine, Alabama, Kansas, just to name a few. I have heard people say that this is about taking things away from the PSC, but it is not that. This is good policy. It is great to see the governor show how important broadband is to our state. Sometimes change can be scary, but sometimes it is necessary. And seeing our governor and his administration proposing such a smart and good policy right out of the gate is awesome. I have a few questions and thoughts to consider that may help clarify this bill, how our agency is going to work together, as we've all discussed before. The PSC has great new leadership and a good staff that serves as a regulatory agency. Will this new broadband office provide direction and with policy and funding while the PSC follows through with the regulatory process? How will the Nebraska Broadband Office coordinate or interact with the CIO's office and their work in deployment of technology throughout the state? Can they be utilized for outreach? I think these are things that would be great resources and good interagency cooperation and support through the whole process, and utilize those that are already in that capacity. I would encourage just a minor amendment to clarify how all these agencies will partner through this process. And I further support the amendment NDOT has put forward, perhaps a few more shalls instead of mays. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haxby. Are there any questions on the committee? Yes, Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your testimony. Do you have any examples of where you'd like to see a shall instead of a may?
I just think that they really, I'm glad that NDOT is taking part in this, because we're talking about getting fiber or things in right of ways. So it's good to see them getting involved, and they should be.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator Brandt.
I apologize for being a little late. We had a bill in agriculture we had to babysit. And I regret not hearing the opening of the hearing, so if what I say is redundant, I apologize. Nebraska's going to get the BEAD money either way, whether it goes through this office or the PSC. Will it really make Gage County any difference?
Just how it is directed and funded. What I see is the money that's coming down is great, but it's probably not going to be enough. We allocated $4 million, turned it into, anywhere from $11 to $13 million project, covered only about 40% of our county. And you take that into millions, and we're a little bit more populated than other parts of our state. We need to be able to come up with creative ways and a very direct, focused group that will try to stretch these dollars as far as possible so we can connect the entire state. Because there's a lot of people, I am on the other side of that digital divide where I hope for 25.3, but in reality, I'm getting 6 and 2, and I have to hotspot to download an ag program. So.
And I know we've spoken before about what you've done in Gage County, and that's just terrific. I mean, you really leveraged this. You did an outstanding job. But one of your main concerns was that you didn't have any fly-by-night outfits come in there. Whoever installed the broadband was going to operate the broadband. And I got the impression from you, you wanted a strong regulatory authority to supervise what was put in. Would that be correct?
We need to have accountability within these things. Now, I think that counties can play a role in that too. We ended up with a 25-year contract with accountability features to make sure that service is provided over that time. So yes, I think there needs to be something or overwatch or get counties involved or public power involved to make sure that these funds are going where they need to go and get stretched as far as possible.
All right, thank you.
Senator Takei.
Thank you, Senator Geist. Emily, with this, you're talking about your project in Gage County, and there are other projects starting to take a hold in the state of Nebraska. Are they looking to your footprint or your blueprint, I should say, on how you're doing things to make it a successful project for them, like up in around Platte County and down in the south central part of the state, or are they reaching out to you on that?
Yeah, we've had multiple counties reach out, request our RFP, and then I've answered questions, and Platte County has put out an RFP and got responses. So yes, it is being repeated.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Boston.
Thank you, Chairman Geist. Thank you, Emily, for being here today. If I heard you right, and correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the concerns you have is right now, our broadband coordinator is Patrick, who's in fiscal or budget office. We have part of them that's in the CIO's office. We have part of the people in the PSC's office. So we're already scattered through many different agencies or departments. And your concern is with the broadband office that we really have a focused office where we have one office that's looking at what the need is, identifying the best way to get the broadband out, best way to use money, rather than to have that one office do that, rather than right now, we're scattered between many different areas of the state. Is that?
Yes, yes, because we went through the challenge process and trying to get all the agencies to get together to work on it, to get it done. And, that's going to affect the funding coming down to our state. So we need to kind of have a focused effort.
Right, and we've heard in the LR that we had before session, you came and testified as some of the work you're doing with the maybe NPPD and others to identify locations in the state, which you would hope that would then, this new office would be able to take that up, or similar type of a process up to ensure that we're identifying unserved, underserved areas in the state.
So we
The
used public power meter data. We were able to get it from all but one public power. And from that, we used a buffer or filter to find the missing locations within the fabric. It's close to 10,000 missing locations within the state of Nebraska. And then that's not the solve all. We also need to be able to correlate the technology used to service that location, as well as the speeds that they can receive. And I think that there's other ways we can get that information with reporting from companies to create our own maps that are a lot more accurate.
Right, and I guess my comment was just the point that with this broadband office, that's their focus.
Yes.
Right now, we have people that are in different agencies or departments that have other jobs they're doing also, but this is really going to be the focus of the broadband office and those they hire. And that would be able to do things similar to what you've done. Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you for your testimony. Any other proponents? Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be back. We've been before you several times, and always glad to be back. We've worked with a number of you and have appreciated those relationships over the years. Let's start. Chair Geist and members of the Transportation Telecommunications Committee. My name is Danny DeLong, DANNY DELONG. I'm here testifying in support of LB 683 as a volunteer on behalf of AARP Nebraska and its over 185,000 members. AARP Nebraska is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization that works across Nebraska to strengthen our communities and advocate for the issues that matter most to families and those aged 50 plus. This includes a focused effort to ensure the availability, affordability, and reliability of broadband internet access services, which are essential to the health and quality of life of older persons. Let me say again, our three guiding principles have been from the beginning: available broadband, affordable broadband, reliable broadband. And we've said that every time we come before you. AARP Nebraska strongly endorses supports LB 683 and strongly endorses the intent of the bill, which we've quoted here in your written testimony. I'll read it aloud. To ensure that all federal, state, and local government funding for broadband infrastructure and services in Nebraska be leveraged strategically to ensure that all Nebraskans have access to affordable, reliable, accessible broadband services before January 1st of 2028. We believe a single centralized Nebraska Broadband Office will be better positioned to coordinate broadband infrastructure, oversee federal grant funding, and advocate on broadband issues at the federal level. We often get asked, why does AARP care about broadband issues? Good question. According to AARP, Nebraska's 2022 Vital Voices survey of Nebraskans age 45 plus, 84% of Nebraskans said staying in their homes as they age is extremely or very important to them. When we say staying in their homes, we mean staying typically in their home communities where their neighbors and friends and relatives are often located. To do that, to help people stay in place and age in place, we know that they need access to reliable and affordable broadband and to have the digital literacy skills necessary to use it. These skills enable proficient use of telemedicine. They fight social isolation through digital connection with family and friends. They allow access to online shopping and services, and they create remote work opportunities. AARP Nebraska supported the state's application for federal digital equity planning grant funding, and we have been pleased to work with the Nebraska Information Technology Commission to hold a series of listening sessions around Nebraska to talk about digital equity and inclusion of older adults as part of the planning grant process. We believe a Nebraska Broadband Office, as envisioned in this bill, would not only play a key role in administering the nearly $600,000 the state has received through the Digital Equity Act to develop the Nebraska Digital Equity Plan, and in administering the additional federal dollars that will be available to implement the plan. The office will be critical in directing the nearly $5 million the state received through the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program, to be used to identify unserved and underserved locations for capacity building of the state broadband office, to create a framework through which grants are distributed to subgrantees based on the structure in place for the Nebraska Broadband Bridge program.
If you would wrap up your
I
comments.
will. For these reasons, AARP Nebraska supports LB 683, and we thank the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee for introducing and supporting the bill, and we will appreciate the committee advancing it to general file. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions on the committee? I don't see any. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Any other proponents? Good morning.
Good morning, Senator Geist, members of the Telecommunications and Transportation Committee. This morning, I'd like to offer up the League of Nebraska Municipalities support for LB 63, or LB 683. My name is Lash, L-A-S-H, Chaffin, C-H-A-F-F-I-N. And for many members, the void right now is getting started. People understand that they don't have broadband. They're told they might be told they have broadband, but they get they don't have it. And right now, nobody knows where to go. Sometimes they go to the league. Sometimes they go to a local company 25 miles away that they know is providing it. Sometimes they contact the Public Service Commission. My guess is they contact your offices on a pretty regular basis. Recently, they've taken to contacting Emily Haxby from Gage County, but they're just desperate to find somebody to talk to. And what excites me about what's going on right now is that the budget office staff has been in communication with us. They're already working with the Department of Transportation in developing technical assistance to get past step one. And that's very, very exciting, for rural league members at this point. And it's something that I think they're going to put a lot of innovation in. They understand that if we consolidate it, if we work on it together, if we collaborate, we can get the word out. We can steer people to the right places. And we're very, very excited about that. And, and obviously I can't speak for the Department of Transportation, but in the past, can the Department of Transportation pull off funding? Yes, they could pull off funding with local leaders. I would submit that when this committee worked on it, the federal funds local government exchange program might be the most complex funding program in the history of the state of Nebraska. And that was hatched in this little room directly north of the director's office. There's a 10-person conference room, and that idea was hatched by their staff. They put all hands on deck to make sure that could be done. There were hundreds of hours of communication, and there were 4 or 5 meetings where city and county officials were all sent to Scottsbluff, Norfolk, Lincoln. I think there might have been another one. And literally the Department of Roads had dozens of staff members there at the time, the Department of Roads, signing documents. They had legal expertise, they had technical expertise, they had engineering expertise. They put an all-out effort into making sure that program worked. And then another program that comes to mind is there was a time in the pre-2010 period that city governments receiving federal funding couldn't get their projects through federal scrutiny on the environmental component. And I think the Department of Roads recognized that this was a problem and knew that this could be tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that we were just going to drop the ball on. Again, they put all hands on deck. They hired environmental consultants. They hired biologists. They had a couple days where they brought everybody into every city, every county, into their conference room there with a little stage. I don't know what they call that room, you could go to every biologist and you could work on your environmental component that you could not get through the Federal Highway Administration scrutiny at the time. So they're not beyond, I can't speak to how they intend to handle broadband. That's Director Kramer's job and not our job. But I do know there are examples in the past where they've bent over backwards to make sure a program with a short, difficult, expensive time frame could be managed. So that said, we are most certainly in support of consolidating this. And for what it's worth, the Department of Roads has been great to work with over time. Some days there's obviously frustrations, but every village board member, the first job they need to have is get the district engineer's phone number on their speed dial. So we certainly have communications with the Department of Transportation on a regular basis. Thank you. I will certainly answer any questions.
Yes, any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you for your testimony. Any other proponents? Good morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Chairwoman, Geist, members of the committee, my name is Bruce Rieker. It's BRUCERIEKER. I'm the Senior Director of State Legislative Affairs for Nebraska Farm Bureau. In addition to representing Farm Bureau today, I'm here on behalf of 7 other ag organizations. The State Dairy Association, Nebraska Cattlemen, Nebraska Corn Growers, Nebraska Pork Producers, Soybean Association, Wheat Growers, and Renewable Fuels Nebraska, all of which are in support of LB 683. This is my first time before this committee this year, and so I just want to pause for a little bit and tell you why we believe those 8 groups are significant to this discussion. Nebraska has approximately 45,000 farmers and ranchers that make up about somewhere between 25 and 33% of the state's economy when you add in the food production complex. And we are also probably the most expensive to connect. But I submit to you, and we can do some economic analysis on this if you would like, but we may be one of your highest rates of return or return on investment of getting broadband to the farmers and ranchers that are the hardest to reach. The reason being is that they're multi-million-dollar operations running multi-million-dollar machinery. Time is money. Senator Brandt, we've been down this path with right to repair. If you have $1 million machine sitting still and you don't have the connectivity to keep them running, weather-related incidents and things like that all impact what we do. I have an anecdotal story of one farmer that, they made a $60,000 investment to get 100 up and 100 down, and it improved their speed of downloading all of the data that goes into agricultural production, whether it's production or the harvesting side of it, from 3 days to 8 minutes. So I know we're here to talk about the broadband coordinator position or the office, and it being at the Department of Transportation. We support this because we need to have a deliberate, intentional, focused approach to providing broadband where it needs to go. Not just the lowest hanging fruit where it's the easiest profit per customer or things like that. But we need to have a place that is not distracted by other obligations. I don't mean that against the Public Service Commission. They have a lot of responsibilities, and I learn from them practically every week what more they have to do. But we need to have a group of people that are focused on this every day to make sure that we are making the smartest, most strategic investments possible. So I will also, as I'm wrapping up my comments, submit to you that we think that this is just a launching pad of where we need to go with e-connectivity, things like that. For those of you who don't know, the agricultural complex has been declared by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security as one of the most vulnerable complexes or industries out there for the last 2 years when it comes to cybersecurity issues. I know we're not here to talk about that today, but I would challenge this committee and also those of us in production agriculture to figure out where we need to go to in the future to help one of our state's largest industries. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'll try and answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairwoman Geist. Thank you, Mr. Reeker, for your testimony. We've worked together on a lot of things in agriculture. I wholeheartedly agree on the IoT, Internet of Things. In agriculture, where you may only have one individual every 5 miles, you've got a lot of pivots and tractors and dairies and feedlots and things that use that. But I guess my question to you is, like I said, I missed the introduction on this, is we're going to add 10 positions, whether they're at the PSC or at NDOT. And those positions are going to do the same thing, whether they're at the PSC or the NDOT. And I guess what I've read and heard a little bit is we're kind of fighting over who gets to say where the Fed funds go. Does it really make any difference at the end of the day on all this money, whether it goes through these 10 added positions, whether NDOT is the main driver on that or the PSC is?
Yes, it does make a difference.
How so?
It depends on who is at the helm and who they hire and how they run that within I don't want to say the confines, but wherever they're located. I will say that when we saw that this was proposed by the governor and where it needed to be housed, the first thing that I thought was, that's a nice place to put it. That's the appropriate place to put it. The jurisdiction of the committee and the legislature is transportation and telecommunications. Vicki. I've only been around her one day, but I'm incredibly impressed with her, the director of the Department of Transportation. But all things that we do, and as I encourage you to look at a much bigger picture than just where this is housed, but the future of our agricultural industry, it's all about transportation, distribution, warehousing, and logistics of inputs, outputs in our industry, but in most of the world now, we need to have not only 10, but some of the highest qualified people doing that without being distracted by other things. Now, they could be distracted by other things at the Department of Transportation. I get that too. But it seems to me that there's been so many tug of wars in this arena so far that maybe some of the turf battles go away with a new home for this. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. That's just an impression that we have. But in the long run, this is a very important issue on a much grander scale. And I think it's critical that we give them the resources to do it and where they need to do it. So I know there's lots of qualified people at the Public Service Commission. Not one thing I have said here is against any of them. That's not.
And I guess that's my main concern. This doesn't turn into a turf war. And you know, our office has worked for 5 years, as I know Senator Bosman and several others on the floor, on nothing but broadband. And I think we are in agreement. We want to make sure this works for all the people in Nebraska. And I guess, do you feel anything needs to be changed on this bill, or it is the right bill for what we're trying to do to make sure there are no turf wars and everybody's going to work together?
Well, a bill doesn't guarantee that there aren't any turf wars. And I've had a lot of conversations in a lot of with other issues, especially how we fund education. This isn't your jurisdiction, but I start with Governor Pillen, and I will speak his praises because I think he has brought a new collaborative temperament and approach to leadership that I am incredibly impressed with. I've known him for a long time, but I didn't know him that well. And he's doing a great job. And I think that will find its way into the agencies, into a lot of the political disputes that we've had in the past, that it will lower the intensity of that because of his leadership skills. We all have to work together, and we have to trust each other, and we have to believe that they're doing it for the right reasons. I truly hope that they hire the right people with the right demeanor to get that done. If people want to make it political, I don't know how to stop them and protect their turf battles. I haven't given you a clear answer.
No, that's fine. So,
but
I think I get the gist of where you're going. So thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me here.
Any other proponents? Are there any opponents to LB 683? Are there any who wish to speak in the neutral capacity? Good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Sitting back there too long. I should have stood up at 7 stretch already. Good morning, Chair Geist and members of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. My name is Dan Watermeyer, spelled W-A-T-E-R-M-E-I-E-R. I represent the Nebraska Public Service Commission's 1st District, and I'm here to testify in a neutral capacity on LB 683. This bill relates to the creation of a Nebraska Broadband Office, which would oversee the coordination of the broadband programs in Nebraska and conduct outreach relating to broadband development in Nebraska. As you know, the PSC protecting the public investment. Since the issuance of the BEAD NOFO, or the Notice of Funding, the Commission has been hard at work to maximize the impact of these federal dollars in Nebraska. Under the director of Governor Ricketts, that BEAD funding would be administered by the Commission. As an attachment to this testimony, I am providing some documents showing the work the Commission is doing in preparing for the BEAD award, as well as the work that must be completed in the very near future. The BEAD program includes a number of deadlines and requirements that must be met. They have to be met so that Nebraska can receive the maximum federal support. Our staff is diligently working through these requirements and is on track to meet upcoming deadlines. In just 6 days, next week, the Commission will submit its initial report to the NTIA. Soon, we will be submitting a 5-year action plan and the initial proposal. If these deadlines are not met, Nebraska will be leaving money on the table. There is no ability for the state to request an extension of time for these deadlines. In order to receive BEAD funding, Nebraska must comply with a number of practical and technical requirements. One of those requirements is equal engagement with stakeholders across the state, including collaboration with local, regional, and tribal entities, as well as outreach to unrepresented communities. The Commission has worked hard over the past months to pursue this engagement and continues that work today. In fact, our new outreach coordinator came on board yesterday and will immediately begin work with stakeholders and communities across Nebraska, and input from all these groups will be of utmost importance as we formulate a plan to reach all unserved locations throughout Nebraska. I also want to ensure the committee is aware of another potential administrative challenge regarding BEAD. According to the documentation filed with the NTIA, the Commission is the administering entity for the BEAD program. While this bill is introduced, doesn't seek to modify any of the administration and or funding from the BEAD program, we understand that there may be amendments offered which make those changes. Any transitions of responsibility is likely to require NTIA approval, and the timeline for their approval is unknown. While BEAD funding will present a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to deploy broadband infrastructure throughout Nebraska, we need to keep in mind there are already grant-funded and universal service-supported broadband networks in various stages of maturity, which will require oversight, and additionally, all these networks need to be sustained in the long term. LB 683 also moves the administration of Nebraska's broadband map to the new broadband office. Pursuant to last year's LB 1144, the Commission has been working on engaging a vendor to create a broadband map for Nebraska. Once the map is in place, the Commission expects that it will be a reference point for Commission programs beyond the administration of federal grant dollars. To that end, I would recommend that any contract entered into for mapping in Nebraska allow the Commission to fully review and input new data. Finally, I want to mention the work of the Connect Nebraska working group over the past several months. We appreciate the collaboration and support offered to us by other agencies and stakeholders, including the Governor's Office, the Broadband Coordinator, the OCIO, the Department of Economic Development, Public Power Districts, NACO, the NTIA, and the League of Municipalities. We feel this collaboration has been to the benefit of Nebraska, and we would encourage any future conversations to have that as well. That is my testimony. I'd be glad to try to answer some questions.
Great. Thank you for your testimony.
Yeah,
Are
sure.
there any questions? Yes, Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Geist, and thank you, Commissioner Watermeyer, for being here and speaking.
Certainly, Senator.
So you kind of highlighted a little bit of this in your testimony, but one question I had is to see if you might be able to elaborate a little bit more on the PSC's abilities to handle this. And specifically what I mean is, kind of managing federal funds, for example, the ability to scale, because that's going to be a huge component of this as well. And then any of the kind of like mapping, auditing as well.
And let me put that in context a little bit to the questions that came up earlier about employment, what we have for an agency. We have 50 in our agency total. 9 of those are involved in the telecommunications side of that. Right now, we administer about $50 million of NUSF dollars every year. We also administer $40 million in Bridge Act every year with that as well. With those people, we're doing that. What we envision doing, because of the BEAD program, and because the BEAD is such a different animal, that we're going to hire, as Director Kramer had mentioned, we're going to hire around 9 extra people. We've already hired 3 of those today. We expect the PSC to expand to be able to take on this extra workload a little bit on the BEAD program, and then in 5 or 6 years, we're going to retract. That's what our goal is, to not overbuild anything that for employees that we can. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but right now we handle between roughly $80 or $100 million a year to add another $100 to $300 million from the BEAD fund is probably going to take more people. And the thing that this committee needs to keep in mind is the BEAD fund is very specific to unserved. In the plan, you have to tell exactly how you're going to get to the unserved. You can't just plow right through a bunch of underserved and put all you want where you need it. It has to have a plan as to how you're going to serve the unserved. You may serve some of the underserved to get to those, but it's very, very specific.
Got it. So the plan is, in terms of scaling, you have the ability to do that, you think, and then expand, then you said retract afterwards.
Yeah, we think it's important to be able to expand to recognize the need for the BEAD program and how unique it is, but then also to retract, because a lot of these people will be contracted individuals, and we think that's going to be the best use of public dollars.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator Bosselman.
Thank you, Chairman Geist. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. What is you have a mapping company you're going to sign a contract with, even though you know that there's a change coming up. Why, or what's that company going to provide?
The change you're talking about initially, actually, when I was in Senator Fisher's office years ago, they talked about spending $50 million to improve the 477. We're to that point today where they've got an improved 477. Nobody really likes it. But the change that I'm sorry, go ahead. The change that I envision happening is the contract that we're going to sign, we're in the process of signing it today. It was going to be about $1 million contract. The NTIA threw out some things and changes, and it suggested that we may be provided some of those numbers to the map as a holistic to all the states. So we're going to sign around a $300,000 contract in order to make sure we get started with the mapping issue today.
So you're going to rely upon the providers to provide the information rather than actual where it's at location. And how does that help us in identifying unserved locations? Because we've already identified by others that they haven't identified those unserved locations. So now we're going to be relying on the same data from the same places to get the same results.
Well, I wouldn't say it's the same data. I mean, the idea that it's improving every day and every year is there. Even I would look back at the last legislative bills that even came through this committee and some of them through you, Senator. In 2019, Senator Brandt offered that, and it was indefinitely postponed, a description of mapping. In 2020, 996 by Senator Brandt talked about a broadband data improvement program, which eventually morphed into what we call the BDC today. We're doing that, even though the bill didn't pass. In 2021, LB 498, DeBoer had a bill that Senator DeBoer would outline mapping broadband and had no mention of detail, but we are focused on those very things. So I think the map is improving. If you go back to what my agency has done, we had the first pilot program in 2012 to actually stretch, bend the rules about taking dollars for telephone and getting them into the broadband world.
But I'm going to come back to the question. My question is you're using an NTA system that relies on the provider to provide you the data. And what we found on the 477, everything we've had up to this date, and why I've had mapping bills put in place to try to get passed through this body, is that we have to have, rather than relying on those who say they will, because I'm telling you, the map that shows for me right now, so it shows I get 250 up and down. No, that's never going to happen. And that's the same information that's going to be relied upon now for this new map. And my concern is unless we go out to address level, what's actually being provided, we're going to miss a whole bunch of people. And I think others have already identified that. So now we're going to contract with someone who's going to provide us similar information, and we're going to miss a whole bunch of people. And I guess that's my question. That's my struggle with the new contract, because yeah, we may get a little bit better, but we're going to miss a whole lot of unserved areas that's out there, especially in my district and others. I just have a real problem with that, I guess. So I guess the question is how is it that your contracts, actually the new contractor is going to improve on address level, what's actually being provided at address level, rather than what the provider says that they're providing?
That's a difficult question, and I'm really not qualified to answer the details and the weeds on that. I'm not. But I can just tell you that it's an evolving process. The minute that we sign the map, it's old, because we're burying fiber every day across the state. You're right, and it's a frustrating process. And the map in itself is so difficult, and it is a political football in many ways. You think about the map as this desk. Above the map, you have locations, and everybody is mad at the fact that their spot may be showing that it has coverage, and it doesn't. Underneath the map are the providers, all those individuals, all the stakeholders that have buried fiber or even existing copper and improving it. They're worried in the fact that it's not accurate, that says, hey, we are covering that, but the map shows it's not. It is a fight to get to that middle ground. It's a total fight, and I get it, Senator. It's frustrating for me as well. It is.
When we, last comment, I guess, or question I have, but when this committee set up the broadband office, we struggled with where to put it. PSC, DED, OCIO, and it ended up being split up between a lot of different areas. You're a regulatory body. PSC is a regulatory body. And I understand you've been doing work, but to me, policy-wise, it seems like that's probably not the place it should end up, that it should end up in this instance, it's a broadband, coordinating the broadband office under DOT. I just, having a regulator responsibility doing these, I guess that's a question, whether that's the right place to have that.
Can I give you my opinion?
Sure.
And how it's morphed over the years, I think I was just leaving the legislature when the idea came that we'd have the bill to put it in the OCIO's office. And I really struggled with that at the time. I didn't feel like it ought to be there because I knew what the PSC was doing at that time and a lot of the conversation was there. But now I can recognize the fact that the governor needs to have a cabinet level person that's underneath his thumb, his or her thumb. And they need to be able to talk to that governor. They need to be able to discuss what the governor's vision is of broadband in the state. So I think it's fine. Well, I had visually thought it'd be fine in the OCIO's office, but it's fine to put it in the DOT. And actually, I reached out to Governor Pillen in November, and him and I and Joe and Dave all talked together about what this is, how we could do this together. Because we're here to be a partner in what the legislature needs. We're all expected by our constituents to stretch, to bend, to do the best we can with what we have to get fiber out there. To get broadband out there. So. And I do think now that it's a good idea to have the governor have a cabinet level person. And that's what I spoke with Governor Pillen about. I wouldn't get too worried about the weeds about how it's going to be administered yet. There's been a lot of talk about staff and moving that around. But the first thing we need to hear is what is the vision? But just know that the PSC stands here ready and willing to get broadband out to the state of Nebraska for workforce, for housing. We need to have people that can have a second job from home that can get the 100 by, hopefully 100 upload speeds to be able to satisfy this workforce. We need broadband in the country for education, K through 12 for post-education. We need it for telehealth. And in my world of agriculture, we need it as well. I also serve on an FCC connectivity group called the FCC Precision Ag Connectivity Group. And we meet monthly. And in the room and in the Zoom meetings, there's Elon Musk group sitting right here. There's Microsoft on the other side of the corner. There's all these stakeholders. There's WISP providers, internet providers, and all this conversation. And everybody's in a political fight. And I think it came up earlier about, should we have this territorial contest? No, we should not have a territorial fight on whether it's at the PSC or the DOT, as long as we're all engaged. But we do need to have territorial fights about how and the investment is made. And I personally believe that the investment has to be made privately. All these entities will have a role in it. And I believe there's a role for public power to be involved in the very high cost areas. But we have to have a fight, and that's where we get good products, is when it's a capital intensive environment like this, we'll have that conversation. Not if that makes sense at all, but in my world that I see, especially through the FCC program, I can just understand what goes on at the federal level so much better after watching how that works.
I appreciate that. This has been my fight for 6 years. I just feel like we're just still fighting, pushing on that same wall I pushed on for 6 years, and we're not getting very far.
And many times I think the other members of that committee, they really would just as soon not have me show up because I'm asking way too many questions. And I'm really the bad guy in the room when I start talking about that.
Thank you.
I have a question for you on the process of BEAD versus the processes of your other, the bridge and the capital projects. You said the BEAD process is very specific. Is it though in process different from your other two processes that you use?
Not greatly, other than the fact that the keys that the federal government has given us we've been approved by the NTIA to have this funding. It's very detailed work. The accountability, the transparency, and the accountability of these funds are at another level. And that's why we felt like we had to hire the number of people that we did. I really didn't want to see my agency grow from 9 to 18. But we need to in order to manage those funds on the short term. Some of those people have other roles that will be played between the capital projects and the BEAD money, but it's not a whole lot different other than the fact what I mentioned earlier is that the BEAD is very specific to the unserved. I mean, if you attempt to serve the underserved, and we've done that with the Bridge Act because the governor was very wise to allow those rules that where we can spend money or award grants to the underserved. But the BEAD program can do that, but you've got to have a very good plan. It's got to be very well spelled out how exactly you're going to do that. And that's not going to be easy in Nebraska. That's why I say as well, it's going to be all hands on deck. I mean, it could be the satellite providers. It could be the internet, the wireless providers. It could be the WISP. Everybody's got to be ready. And that's why having a broadband coordinator I have come to agree that that's a good idea for the governor to have that and under his thumb and not in my office.
Yeah. But you see that coordinating very closely with your office, I assume.
Yeah, we'll see how that works out.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be difficult, I'll tell you. But what I told the governor in November was, we are here to support what his vision of the state is. And it really shouldn't be any different for any of us in this room. And we can't be territorial in the building in that regard. But it is going to be a stretch to see how this gets administered as quickly as we can. We hired a person yesterday that came on board. We've got a deadline Monday that we have to meet. This August deadline for the initial planning is huge. It's absolutely huge. I wish I could give you a metric as to how far down the road we are. Whether if it's 1 to 10, if we're at 4 or 5 or 6, and we're somewhere in the third of the range.
Okay.
But it's all in the cloud yet, I would say. It's hard to pin it down, but we're ready to turn that over in August because that August deadline is a big deal.
And specifically, that's your 5-year plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Weinmeier. Nice to see you. I have to admit, I'm getting a little bit of whiplash from your testimony here. So you're neutral, but your written testimony seems to lean a little bit in opposition. Then you answered Senator Bosselman's question, said you support making this a cabinet level position, which would be in support of the bill.
Mhm.
And so,
That's why I went over on time.
okay, so is the cabinet level position your personal position, or is that the position of the PSC?
It's the position of the PSC that we remain neutral on this bill. But I would tell you that originally when it went to the OCIO office, I was okay with that.
But
And I
so
think it's okay that it goes to the DOT.
I'm just trying to get clarification, but it going to the DOT is your personal position, not the PSC's position.
And no, that would be the PSC's position. We
They-
voted to be neutral on this bill. Which,
Okay, voted to be, but you're saying you're okay with it going, that's different than being neutral, that's being in support.
no, I really, just as long as the governor has a cabinet level person, he can name where he needs to be.
Okay. Okay, so the timeline, this, obviously, if we were to exec on this 10 minutes from now and kick it out and go to floor debate, et cetera, you know the timeline on these things, we would not even be able to pass this before February 13th. So obviously that portion of it would stay, the February 13th upcoming deadline would remain under your purview. Is it disruptive or easy peasy transition for the June 30th and beyond deadlines if we were to enact this legislation?
I can't answer that. I really don't know to what degree we start turning things over. It's going to be difficult, but we'll do what it needs to be done.
Is there anything that would it, if we were to enact this legislation with an enactment date after August, would that make it an easier transition? If this portion of it worked, if you were to work in tandem with the department and that on the strategic plan, but then not turn it over until after that August date, would that be easier? You don't have to answer that now, but
Well-
I think that's something that we would need to know before.
Let me answer it like this, is the fact that it would probably make it easier just on black and white dotting the i's, crossing the t's. But my responsibility to reach out to the broadband coordinator, to the governor's office, and to you would not change. We're still going to do the same thing. The BEAD plan's got to happen, and the initial planning has to happen. So whether we turn it over now and it's actually signed differently, I really don't see that as the argument. We got to get the job done one way or another.
Have there been conversations between the PSC and the Department of Transportation over how this would look, the transitioning from one to the other?
No, not really. We've talked about what we have, what they have. It's been in a public setting with other members.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Senator DeBoer.
Thank you. Sorry, I was introducing a bill in another committee and I sort of missed some of this, so I might ask for repetitive something. I apologize to the committee. Give me a nod and I'll shut up. So how has, so far we have this coordinator under the Department of Information and Technology, is that right?
No, actually the coordinator today was just in the budget office and directed by, or ordered by Governor Ricketts to work with as the broadband coordinator. Governor Pillen, with his executive order, created the position, and I think it's actually moved into the DOT today. So Patrick's job is actually in the DOT today.
Okay, so the original office was in budget, now it's in DOT.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Have you worked with this office in the past as on the broadband bridge program? You've worked with it when it was in the budget office?
Actually, just since the BEAD funding, our conversation started in probably June or July, when the governor was starting to talk and ask about what this is going to look like. We had a press conference, Governor Ricketts and I had a press conference in August, I believe, when he did two things. He had to write a letter first and say, yes, Nebraska wants to apply for BEAD funding. Second letter came in later August, I believe it was. He named the PSC as the administrating office for the BEAD funds. So we had that. Shortly before that, we actually started having conversations with the governor's office, meaning Patrick Redmond, in regards to how we're going to do this. The stakeholder group has grown. It's been good. We've had, I'd say, good involvement by all the stakeholders. I hope we haven't missed any stakeholders. I was a little concerned is that we couldn't really offer that meeting. I told Patrick that one day, if we offer that meeting, we absolutely have to have every single person in the room invited. And I worry sometimes that we may have missed some stakeholders. So I would say that that conversation was started in earnest in July.
Okay. And you may have answered this question already. If we do not pass this bill, would the Public Service Commission be able to scale up to distribute the BEAD money through basically the same mechanism as the broadband bridge?
Yes, I answered Senator Frederickson's question earlier there about the same thing. We have 9 employees now. We envision adding about 8 or 9 more. That's to flex while we influx with the BEAD funds, and they'll hopefully ramp back down in 5 or 6 years down to the same program we have. It's not that much different than administrating, but the mission of the BEAD funds are that much different in the fact that it's very strict in having to go to the unserved. You can't just plow through a bunch of underserved places and get it paid for to get to the unserved unless it's in the plan, and it's going to be a challenge to get that written.
Okay. And then, but the unserved, underserved are things that you've already dealt with. You've already dealt with different speed, changing speeds as we in the legislature changed the speeds. I don't know, last year, 2 years ago, you would know more than me. I can't remember when that was. I feel like maybe it was 2020.
We've actually changed the speeds 4 times since I've been around.
Okay.
2012, it started off at 4.1. After that, it went to 8.1 or 8.2, and then to 12.1 or 2 or 3, and then now it's at 25.3. So that started in 2012 with our first pilot program that we had to actually support broadband development in the state. So we've had to operate in a moving target, but that's what the public demands.
Right. And the Public Service Commission has at all times sort of been the main, I don't know, agency through which we, you're a commission, but commission through which we have distributed those funds for broadband deployment in Nebraska. Is that right?
Yes, except for the CARES Act, which happened a year ago. That was through the DED, a separate program. I really can't get into the details of what that is. Now we have ARPA funds that actually opened up the door. Every county had the opportunity to divert the first $10 million away from their funds to broadband. That's the example that was given in Gage County.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have for you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairwoman Geist. Thank you, Director Watermeyer, for appearing today. This map that you handed out, these are just the PSC projects, correct?
You were correct. Yeah, we wouldn't have record of what was spent in the CARES, at my understanding. That's correct.
And these are ongoing, a lot of these projects?
Yes.
They're getting knifed into the ground even as we speak, right?
Yeah, in the lower left-hand corner, if you look to, I mean, it's a little hard to describe, like everything in this telecom world, it's very specific. You can see what 21 and 22 did with the Bridge Act, what we've been doing with ongoing high-cost support for the Nebraska Universal Service Fund and where those locations are.
And then the bottom one says fiber to premise. Is that a different program or these are completed projects?
That's if it was, it could be that we've supported an issue that wasn't fiber, but this would be specific to fiber.
Okay. And I applaud you for testifying in the neutral capacity. It is a refreshing change to have an administration that doesn't come up in the negative capacity on a lot of stuff. I serve on several committees where that was not good. And so thank you for that. I guess the question I've got is, listening to your testimony, if you can make any changes on the bill, what would it be?
Senator, I think that's in the works yet. I wanted to be here today in a neutral capacity to bring you up to speed about what we've done, what we're doing today, and clearly what we're very worried about doing in the next 6 to 8 months. I don't know the change that would be necessary other than we just all need to come together and have the right goal.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Senator DeVore.
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought of the one more topic that I wanted to discuss, which was mapping. So if the fabric mapping responsibilities are moved over away from the PSC, will this inhibit your ability to distribute Broadband Bridge Act money? And will that have any effect on the USF funds and how you sort of work with some of those territorial disputes? I can't remember what we call it, where somebody
Boundary changes.
Boundary changes.
Yes.
All of those things.
It did come up in conversation in the last couple of weeks about the work that the boundary changes have done. Senator Fisher introduced that bill 8 years ago. And we are really now just getting it up to speed and the public's becoming aware of it, that they can request the boundary change. It's been a great thing. It hasn't moved a mountain as far as the number of changes, but it's got the public engaged now that they know they can make these requests. To answer your question, I don't think it's going to defer or deflect what we would do, whether the map was under the control of the DOT or not, as long as we had access to the map. Keep in mind, the map is old the day it's printed. We're bearing fiber every day, and lots of stuff going on in the state, so it has to be accurate, it has to be updated, and as long as that's done and we have access to it, we can use it.
Okay.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank
All
you
right,
for your
thank you, Senator.
testimony. Any other neutral testimony? Good morning.
Morning, Chair Geist, Vice Chair Mosier, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Andrew Vinton. That's spelled ANDREW-VINTON. I'm the in-house legal counsel and lobbyist for Allo Communications. I'm testifying today on LB 683 in the neutral capacity. Allo was founded by Brad Moline in Imperial, Nebraska in 2003, and today is the largest telecommunications provider that's majority owned and managed in Nebraska. For 20 years, Allo has been building ubiquitous, citywide, fiber-to-the-premise networks in communities throughout the state and has invested nearly $600 million of private capital in bringing broadband to Nebraskans. Once Allo's in-progress builds are completed, more than 60% of Nebraskans who live outside of the city of Omaha will have access to Allo's symmetrical gigabit or multi-gig service. Our efforts have resulted in the city of Lincoln being ranked in the top 3 of the 100 largest American cities in upload speeds, download speeds, and latency. We take immense pride in providing all Allo customers with world-class service. Allo strongly supports the concept of establishing a state broadband office. State broadband offices have proved to be valuable tools in other states where we do business. These type of entities are well suited to coordinate with communities, identify areas of need, and recruit qualified providers to submit broadband grant applications. Each state has chosen a unique manner in locating its broadband office. In some states, the broadband office is directly aligned with the governor's office, whereas in other states, the broadband office is located within a separate state agency. In many states, the broadband office has been operating for a number of years and has managed multiple rounds of state and federal grants. Our primary concern with the proposed Nebraska Broadband Office, which would be housed in the Nebraska Department of Transportation, is that it may have difficulty ramping up its staffing and expertise in time to distribute incoming federal broadband funds. We believe the current Nebraska Broadband Bridge program has worked well and that the Public Service Commission has done a good job of evaluating grant applications and awarding grant funding to meritorious projects. We would advise the new broadband office to lean heavily on the expertise, experience, and industry knowledge of the PSC commissioners and staff, and to coordinate closely with the PSC in all its efforts. Due to the constrained timeframe in developing a state action plan and to distribute federal broadband funds, the broadband office may be best suited to operate as a community outreach, policy creation, and advocacy body, while the PSC, who are the subject matter experts, remain the ultimate distributor of grant funding. At this point in time, this would be ALLO's recommendation. However, regardless of which agency is ultimately chosen to make grant funding decisions, ALLO intends to participate in upcoming broadband grant programs and regards them as a valuable opportunity to bridge the digital divide in rural Nebraska. We will simply advocate for efficiency, consistency, transparency, and accountability. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning. Chairperson Geist, members of the committee, my name is Tip O'Neill, that's spelled T-I-P-O''N-E-I-L-L. I'm president of the Nebraska Telecommunications Association. The NTA is a trade association that represents the majority of companies that provide landline, voice, and broadband telecommunication services to Nebraskans across the state. Companies have made substantial investments in Nebraska and serve significant numbers of customers while employing many of our citizens. We are testifying in a neutral capacity on LB 683. As we testified at the LR 401 hearing before the T&T committee in December, we view the next 5 years as a great opportunity to bridge the real digital divide that exists in Nebraska. At that hearing, we supported adding additional resources to the state broadband office to take advantage of this generational opportunity. We want to give thanks for the work that interim broadband director Patrick Redmond has done in bringing stakeholders together for face-to-face meetings as the state moves forward with its broadband strategy. Those efforts have made a positive impact on the way Nebraskans, with sometimes divergent viewpoints, will work together in implementing a long-term broadband plan. We believe the state broadband office can have a major positive impact on state broadband policy through outreach efforts, strategic planning, agency coordination, advocacy, and public information activities. Our concern with LB 683 has to do with uncertainty on how the process for provision of grant funding will work. First, we support the process the PSC has used in successfully administering the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Act. We believe it is a significant improvement from the process used in the distribution of CARES Act dollars for broadband. The process for distribution of ARPA capital projects funds began in January. A new distribution process for BEAD and perhaps the second year of the Capital Projects Fund will create uncertainty for broadband providers with a history of successful deployment. Second, we want to ensure that a new process will not slow down Nebraska's ability to deploy broadband in a timely fashion. The state has not yet hired a full-time director of broadband. If functions are transferred from the PSC to the broadband office, we believe delays will be inevitable. Finally, we are concerned about transferring state mapping authority from the PSC to the broadband office And Brian Thompson from Consolidated Companies will discuss the issue after my testimony. He's much more of an expert on that issue than I am. We have not had sufficient time to review the governor's amendment that was proposed this morning, and I may provide additional comments to the committee later. Thank you for your consideration of this proposed legislation, and be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator DeBoer.
Mine is just a comment that this is a backwards running of all of the committee councils that we've had in TNT since I got here. Have now been up. Just wanted to point out that we've had all of them now up here.
Well, it's always a pleasure to deal with those committee councils of the past and present who are smarter than I am. So I appreciate that.
That's all.
Any other
I had
questions?
a similar comment, actually.
Any other questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you for your
Thank
testimony.
you. Appreciate it.
Any other neutral testimony? Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Brian Thompson. I am the Vice President of External Relations for Consolidated Companies, and that's spelled BRIANTHOMPSON. I too had many concerns that Tip has already laid out, and because of the mapping questions, I thought I ought to kind of dig in a little bit on mapping and go over some of that with folks. I would say that we've been a part of several of the broadband bridge processes so far, and we have worked very hard on making that work. In the first round, we got 7 grants. In the second round, we were awarded 2 more. We've currently, over the last 3 years, built nearly $18 million worth of fiber to the home projects for farms, businesses, homes in town, whatever was in the project. And in 2022 alone, we cut over 1,667 locations to fiber in rural central Nebraska. The mapping information that you're seeing today in the fabric map dates clear back to June of last year. And so there were numerous customers cut over past that time. We currently have 3 bridge projects in progress and 3 other rural projects that were not a bridge grant project that total over $3.5 million. And so we are every day building more and more and hooking up more customers. To talk a little bit about the fabric map and give you to try and break all the acronyms, BDC stands for Broadband Data Collection, which is when they request all ISPs provide their data to the FCC and NTIA for the map. In the first round of this mapping process, 8,531 federal ID records were imported by Consolidated for locations out in our service territory. We changed the GIS or geographical information or addresses on over 3,000 of those 8,500 records. And we identified 2,781 locations that were invalid of those 8,500. We requested 1,095 new federal ID numbers that were not identified in the original map. So they were locations that weren't even there. We requested a new ID number for those locations. That's an 81% error rate in our service territory. We serve 1/8 of the state's landmass. So, it's kind of a big process when you look at it that way. The FCC accepted only 4,333 of our challenges that we had issued around locations, and another 1,043 of our challenges were overtaken by new FCC data. And what does that mean? They were kicked out. They were kicked out because what happens with the FCC's mapping process, the fabric map, is that there are algorithms and artificial intelligence that go out and rake off addresses and information out of public databases for every different state. When that happens, they find discrepancies with addresses and GIS information and county assessor information and that type of thing. Therefore, those discrepancies will kick out a location that's, it's a house on 33rd Street and it definitely has service from a provider, but because it has a problem between its 911 address and its county assessor address, it'll be kicked out. We have an entire town, Arthur, Nebraska, that's been kicked out. So we have a lot of different processes that need to be worked on in this mapping situation. We are already in the second round of redoing our BDC data and updating it, and it has to be submitted by March 1. And we have spent thousands of man hours working on this process. So with that, I'll close my comments and answer any questions anyone might have.
Are there questions? Yes, Senator Vosterman.
Thank you, Chairman Geist and Mr. Thompson for being here. I guess what you say is right to my point, is that the maps are inaccurate. The maps they're going to contract with to do are going to be inaccurate. And we need to have actual address level mapping done. And unless we do that, we're going to leave potentially hundreds of millions of dollars on the table because we don't have a map and we don't have a way, and the PSC has not challenged the map. So we're going to have another 477 dilemma where we're going to have a map that's going to leave a bunch of people out because we've already identified that by other means that those locations are being left out. So I'm not sure. I think you're speaking more to, maybe I'm missing it, but I think you're speaking more to my concerns with perhaps the mapping that they're going to, that they're now contracting with. It's going to be more the same.
What I can tell you is that the PSC has done challenges to the areas that they've identified that aren't showing up on the map. But
and their challenges is by 911, and FCC says you can't use that as a challenge anymore. So now we're back to we need address level, we need locations, and we're not going to do that.
Which I think the legislature could do something about, and that would be if the legislature would require the situs address for the county and the 911 address to be the same, as well as the U.S. postal address, then we wouldn't have this problem.
But, okay, go ahead.
And the long and the short of it is, this is address level stuff at the fabric. We go straight to the house, we do a GIS location at the house, and we use the service address, and it has an FCC's federal ID number assigned to that house.
I can tell you for mine, no, that didn't happen. So how many of my houses are out there? And I think we've already shown there's thousands to maybe tens of thousands of these. So well, that's my concern. My concern is we're going to have a map that's going to continue to miss a number of locations because maybe not everybody's doing what you're doing.
Well, I would say that every state has kind of the same problem to some extent. And secondly, no, I don't know that everybody has done as deep dive as we have. But to me, it's really important to get that information right because at an address level, we're going to have to challenge people who may try to get a grant for our area that we've already built.
And I appreciate that. And I mean, we've had a 477 out there for years and it's never, and for, it's been inaccurate. So if we use the same process, not everyone may do what you're doing, grant that. So I appreciate that. I'm just concerned that we're going to be leaving a lot of people, unserved areas left off, and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars because of that. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. Are there any other questions? I have one that I'd like you to clarify. In your opinion, in moving the maps from the PSC to the coordinator, does that break continuity of what you've done?
Well, the fabric map is the fabric map. That's how we'll get the money from the federal government.
Okay.
If you move the responsibility of kind of housing Nebraska's fabric map over to the Department of Transportation, I'm not really sure that unless you require counties to do what they need to do to provide data that can be utilized out of the software that the FCC uses, I'm not sure it'll change much. And we, as a provider, just have to keep uploading new data all the time and hoping it doesn't get rejected.
But that's really, doesn't matter whether it's under the PSC or the coordinator, correct?
Probably not, as long as we have access, or as long as the Public Service Commission has access to the map as well as the coordinator. And it's, very real time, so that if there are challenge issues around Broadband Bridge or some of the things that they're doing with USF or any of those type of things, they just have to have access to that information so that challenges can be managed from grant processes. The other part of that is within the BEAD process, I think that challenges will be kind of more significant because we might be talking about bigger dollars. We might also, I don't want the process to be if it's a one-person decision at BEAD with the broadband coordinator, that's a little bit concerning. I'm worried about lawsuits and things like that if it's just one person making that decision.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
If I could make one last comment, I handed out there was a handout that had the little.
This one?
Yes.
Thank you, yes.
Senator Decay had brought up a question before about the meters and public power and so forth. And I think that the meter data is pretty good information to have out there. But one of the situations that occurs with the meter data is that if you look at that map right there, that's a good indication of my family's ranch yard. And what happens is we have one meter in the middle of the ranch yard and all three of our ranch houses are on that meter. Well, those ranch houses are 500 yards, 300 yards, and 150 yards from the meter. The GPS location of the meter is the only GPS that's delivered to the map. We deliver a GPS for the actual house itself to the map for each of our locations. There's another issue with the map, and that is it has a hard time handling more than one house on a parcel. Well, here we go. You have three houses in the farmyard or ranch yard, it only counts one. So to try and give you a little more understanding that the meters on the side of the house in town are probably okay. But in an ag area, they become very convoluted in what is going on with the GIS data.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions. Thank you for your explanation.
Okay.
The other neutral testimony.
Thank you and good morning. Barely, but still morning. Good morning, Chair Geist and members of the committee. My name is Cullen Robbins, Cullen Robbins. I'm the director of the Telecom and NUSF Department with the Public Service Commission. I will be brief, but I wanted to provide a couple of clarifying points and address, I know there's been a lot of discussion about mapping, so I thought it'd be helpful to provide some more context on some of that. First of all, I wanted to address some of Senator Bosselman's concerns on the contract and how we're planning to move forward with that map. The map that we plan to produce will have location-specific information, so essentially address-level information. Part of the benefit of having this, having our own state contract is that it would allow meaningful public input into determining where unserved and underserved locations are. The FCC process does allow for public input, and I think that's one thing that's been extremely beneficial over previous versions of the map, where there are challenge processes in place, and I want to emphasize there are more than one challenge process that is relevant to that process. One is the fabric location challenge that I think you and Mr. Thompson were discussing earlier. And at least for the purposes of BEAD, I would just offer that I don't think states were really offered a meaningful opportunity to participate in that process. And then the second challenge process in place is a availability challenge. So it's essentially looking at who's reporting service there, and both the state and individuals have the opportunity to submit challenges to that information. So I certainly hope, Senator, that you have submitted a challenge for your location, because I know in discussions with you, you're not served. So just a couple points on that. Location-specific data is extremely helpful. One of the other pieces of what we expect to get from the state broadband map is modeling information. That's a crucial piece of what we need as we develop a 5-year plan for BEAD. You have to kind of part of the planning process is determining what the costs are to get to the unserved locations that you identify, and that's an extremely important piece of that. Just a couple other brief statements. I wanted to talk briefly about staffing. I wanted to mention that of the permanent staff that we've hired so far for BEAD, some of those individuals are split amongst BEAD and capital projects, so they're not all fully funded through BEAD. And accounting-wise, we do have staff within the commission that handles those duties and is able to do that moving forward. So just a couple things on staffing, and with that, I'll just stop, and I'm happy to answer questions that you might have.
Okay, are there questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody else to testify in the neutral capacity? Anybody else in the neutral? And do we have some letters? Okay, so we've got 3 letters in support, and we have, make sure I'm on the right bill, and no opposition and no neutral letters. Okay, are you going to close? Okay. I believe Senator Geist is going to open on the next bill momentarily, so maybe we'll just stand down for a couple minutes till she gets back. Thank you. Geist will have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Mosier, and good, I believe it's afternoon. No, it's still morning. Members of the Transportation Telecommunications Committee, for the record, my name is Suzanne Geist, Suzannegeist, and I represent District 25, which is the southeast corner of Lincoln and Lancaster County. I introduced LB 412 to create grants for broadband deployment from the ARPA Capital Funds project in Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District to be deployed in an entire exchange area that includes a city of the second class or a village. I want to provide a little background on why I introduced this bill. The section I am changing was included in LB 1024 that was passed by the legislature last year. The American Rescue Plan Act was passed by Congress in 2021. More than $6 billion were allocated to Nebraska, with about $3.3 billion to individuals, $773 million to K through 12 and higher education, $287 million to cities, $375 million to counties, $1 billion to the state of Nebraska, and additional $125 million to the state for capital projects. The legislature included $35 million from the ARPA Capital Projects Fund in LB 1024, in addition to other regular ARPA funding appropriations for multi-purpose community facilities in the 2nd Congressional District. $40 million was appropriated for projects in the 1st and 3rd Congressional Districts. Governor Ricketts filed the Nebraska Plan for utilization of ARPA Capital Projects funds with the U.S. Department of Treasury after the passage of LB 1024. His plan called for the use of those funds in Districts 1 and 3 for broadband deployment. The portion of the plan for utilizations of funds for broadband, which are presumptively eligible projects based on Treasury guidance, has been approved by the Treasury. LB 1024 treated projects differently in Districts 1 and 3. Any areas within District 1 are eligible for projects, including projects not within a municipality. In District 3, projects are eligible only if they are located within second-class cities and villages. LB 412 would allow capital project grants to provide high-speed broadband services in rural areas not within municipalities, which are often unserved or underserved locations, as long as they are within the exchange area that includes a city of the second class or village. By making this change, I believe this will assist broadband companies to provide high-speed services in the areas that may need them the most. Thank you for your time and attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, there are questions? Senator DeBoer.
Is this allowed within ARPA then? We can make this change and it doesn't in any way upset our ability to get ARPA funds?
That is my understanding.
Perfect. Thank you.
Other questions? Wow. Must have been pretty easy to understand. Okay, is there anyone here to speak in support of this bill? How many people will testify? Oh, boy. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair.
One moment.
Oh, excuse me.
Just a little procedural note. We have a number of testifiers and it's already noon and we have to come back at 1:30 to reconvene. So we're going to go with 3-minute testimonies.
Sure.
Just to kind of recognize everybody's time. Thank you.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
Sure. Vice Chair Mosier, members of the committee, my name is Tip O'Neill, TIP-O''N-E-I-L-L, and I'm the president of the Nebraska Telecommunications Association. The NTA supports LB 412 as introduced. I have an amendment to the bill that is being passed out now that I believe would clarify the issue further. As Senator Geist testified in her opening, the provision limiting broadband projects from ARPA capital projects funds in the 3rd Congressional District is problematic. It is our belief that the language relating to districts, congressional districts 1 and 3 should be the same. That is what our proposed amendment does. We believe unserved and underserved areas in the state should be eligible for funding, whether they are located within municipal boundaries or outside those areas. Our amendment makes the language the same for the more rural congressional districts in Nebraska. We believe that is appropriate. Cities of the second class and villages would continue to be eligible for funding in the 3rd congressional district, but so would other cities and rural exchanges. I ask you to advance LB 412 with the amendment. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, are there questions for the testifier from the committee? Yes, Senator Bosselman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Moser. Why would we want to strike out the second class and villages? Why would we want to strike that language out?
Because it would make all cities, second class cities and villages.
But the whole point of this is to unserved, and wouldn't, if it's a city of a municipal class, I would think.
If they were unserved, they would still be eligible.
But if it's I guess the thing is the whole point of the bill is to get it to those smallest communities out there, because those are the ones that are going to need the funding the most, because those are the ones that don't have the most business class. Why would we intentionally remove those and include more broader area to where people will go to the larger cities versus the small towns and villages?
Again, it's our belief that there are unserved and underserved areas throughout the entire 3rd congressional district. And we don't believe that the ARPA capital projects funds should be limited only to provision of broadband in those second class cities and villages.
Sure. So then those won't get served, those won't get built out, but all the larger cities will, towns and cities will, unless we do.
All the larger cities, you're talking first class cities are, I don't know of any first class city that is not built out over 100 by 20 in the 3rd congressional district. Now, you might have more data than I do, but I would guess if you looked at Scottsbluff, North Platte, Kearney, Grand Island, Norfolk, all of those cities have competitive broadband providers there who provide at least 100 by 20.
Yeah, my concern is we're gonna, by striking that, is those who need it the most remote, to have the least business class or business model for funding it will be left out, and we'll just do the bigger towns. So that's just my concern.
Okay, well,
thank you.
Okay, other questions? Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Vice Chair Moser. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, for your testimony. I'll echo what Senator Bosselman said. The 3rd district's a different animal from the 1st. And if you listen to the floor debate, Senator Wayne is always up and saying North Omaha has unserved and underserved areas. I imagine some of our first class cities, maybe like Columbus, maybe not. There's always going to be sections that are unserved or underserved. The intent is to get this to the villages and just the second class cities. And so I guess I would echo what he said and like to see that.
So would you then my question would be, would it be logical then to put that language in for the 1st congressional district also?
As far as I'm concerned, it would be. I mean, that, we could have that discussion, I guess, off the mic.
Okay, other questions for Mr. O'Neill? Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, supporter.
I got the message on short, so I'll go short. My name is Brian Thompson. I'm the Vice President of External Relations for Consolidated Companies. That's spelled BRIANTHOMPSON. And today I'm appearing for you in support of 412. And basically, I'm just going to give you the examples of what's going on out in the field. I'm building in areas that are villages, mostly in the 3rd district. There are, most of the villages that we serve have not done much to update their village legal limits or boundaries over the last 30 years or more. And we also have unincorporated villages that are as big as our incorporated villages. We can't use this money in unincorporated villages anywhere. We can only use the money inside of the perfect legal limit of the current village, even if that excludes 2 or 3 streets worth of houses that they've not updated their village boundary with. Or if there are gas stations or truck stops or anything right out of the edge of town that are all part of a community, but outside of the perfect legal limit of the village, then we can't use the money there either. So the way that the rules read, you cannot extend past the village limit with ARPA fund capital projects dollars. That's the biggest problem for me in the 3rd district with this money. So, you know, I have a project that I've got to build all at the same time. I'm not going to build a town, you know, part of it here and part of it there. I want to build the whole town at the same time while I have the contractors in there on my construction team, and only half of the town or 2/3 of the town is able to be built with the project. So I have to separate the rest of the project out and make it another separate project unavailable for those funds.
Okay, other questions? Senator Brand.
Thank you, Vice Chair Moser. So before you go in there, you know what you're going to do. You've got a plan, you've got a map. You know that truck stop isn't inside the city limits. Isn't it possible to use the ARPA funds where you can use the ARPA funds and then come into the Broadband Bridge Act or this other pool of money and say, hey, we're here at this time and we need 10% of this project funded with another pool of money? That's not a possibility?
You at this time, you can't really blend the two grant processes because the grant processes run at separate times. So could we break off half of the town and leave it for another grant and then hope that we get another grant 6 months down the road or something along that line? Possibly. But one of the problems when you design a fiber network like that, you leave the central office where the fiber originates, and then you serve everybody on both sides of the street as you head out of town. That same piece of fiber is going to go all the way out of town to that truck stop. And as it goes further out, it will get smaller because you have the main, the main group of customers in town, and then the network gets smaller. That's just how that design works. But you want to have a specific pair of fibers for each one of those serviceable locations, plus additional fibers so that you can serve locations that are built later.
But there's nothing preventing you as a company from making a business decision that there's enough viable service out here that we can hook everybody up without the subsidy.
That's true. In the case of most of these grant processes, there's fairly specific amount of overhead to do a grant of any kind. And if you're going to do a grant project, you want to make it be as big as you can for a very good sized project and cover a worthwhile group of folks when you are bringing contractors to town or construction teams. So yes, we could make a business decision if there's enough out there. I mean, it's not, when you have, 2 gas stations outside of the town of Thedford and you only touch 2 other customers in between those 2 gas stations and it's 5 miles of fiber.
Yep.
But could that be in a project? Yeah.
All right, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Senator Boswell.
Sorry, Vice Chair. So in the bill on line 11, it says, 1011 says award grants under subdivision 1C of section to any portion of a local exchange or area containing a city of a second class or village. So if it says any portion of a local exchange, how does that change what we're talking about?
Well, so it allows you to be inside and outside of the city limits. That's basically what that's saying.
Okay. So, and you're saying you can't go outside of the city limits?
Not now with the current language in the 3rd district. And my entire service area is in the 3rd district.
Is that our language or is that federal language?
That was in 1024.
Okay, so we just need to change 724.
Yeah, well, LB 1024, that language that was proposed, and this was the proposed solution to it.
Okay, so if we change it, then you can.
Yes.
So then you can build out that whole exchange if you wanted to.
Yes.
So then I'm a little lost here. So you said you can't build an unincorporated town or a certain city because you only could, or village because you only build half. Whose rules are those?
And that's in LB 1024 today.
So
And when LB 1024 was taken to the Public Service Commission to have the rules and process put together for the capital projects grant process, because it says that you can only be within a village or a city of the 2nd class, then that means you cannot extend past the village or 2nd class cities boundary.
Correct. So this fixes that. So now you are able to.
Correct. If we do this, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So what they're complaining about is what the bill is intended to solve.
Yeah, I mean,
They're both,
this bill fixes the problem, yes.
yes, okay.
Yes.
I was having a little trouble. It seemed like it was my wife and I arguing. We're not listening to each other sometimes. Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Yeah.
Oh, did you have a question, Senator?
I was just dramatically laughing with my hands.
Thank you very much. Further support testimony? We have 2 letters of proponents and no opposition and no neutral letters.
All right.
So, please.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Mosher, members of the committee. I will keep this short and sweet, given the fact that it is lunchtime. My name is Brent Smoyer, Brent Smoyer, here on behalf of the Nebraska Rural Broadband Alliance, a group of rural telecoms stretching from border to border across the state, many of them in the 3rd district. I won't rehash anything that's been said previously. I think we agree with what my predecessors have stated in terms of the importance of this bill and how it remedies what was essentially I guess for lack of a better term, just a minor mistake fairly major mistake, but minor language mistake in 1024. In fact, as I recall, Senator Bostelman was part of the legislative history, speaking with former Chair Friesen on the floor about how this bill would potentially have, or how this bill would be needed based on the current language of 1024. So we do appreciate that being laid out. Appreciate this being brought forward by Chairwoman Geist, and would simply ask that as we move forward on this, and clearly there may be a little polish necessary in the language, that we move as quickly as possible. The ARPA grants are getting ready to be tranched out at various times here, I think possibly as early as the end of this month. And so the sooner this bill can be enacted, the sooner this bill can be signed by the governor, the sooner we can make sure that those funds are equitably distributed into the rural areas and made best possible use for these projects. With that, I'll happily take any questions.
Okay, questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
More supporters? If you plan to testify, please come up in the front row and get queued up and ready to go. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. I guess it's good afternoon now, Chairman or Vice Chairman Mosher and members of the committee. My name is Dayton Murty, spelled Dayton Murty, and I'm testifying today in support of LB 412 on behalf of Charter Communications. Charter is a leading broadband connectivity company and cable operator providing superior high-speed internet, voice, video, and mobile services under the brand name Spectrum to more than 32 million customers across 41 states. In Nebraska, we serve over 178,000 customers in 90 communities. And in 2021, we paid over $20 million in taxes and fees and we invested over $36 million of private capital to expand our network to reach an additional 8,000 homes and small businesses. With the influx of federal funds for broadband expansion through ARPA, CPF, and BEAD, Nebraska has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to ensure that every resident of the state has access to reliable, high-speed, affordable broadband internet and the vocational, educational, and telehealth opportunities that provides. As you know, rural areas of the state where a greater amount of investment in broadband infrastructure is required to reach each potential customer are saddled with the greatest need for public subsidy in order to be served. Because of the way the law is currently written, Capital Projects Fund Round 1, however, excluded those unincorporated areas of the state with the greatest need by limiting grant applications in Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District to the boundaries of second-class cities and villages. LB 412 will open up those areas of the state for future CPF grant rounds and enable broadband providers like Charter to submit grant applications to build out broadband infrastructure to those with the greatest need. For this reason, Charter Communications supports the passage of LB 412. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions for the testifier? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. More support testimony?
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Moser, members of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. My name is James Dukesher, James Dukesher. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Nebraska Rural Electric Association. We're here in support of LB 412. We'd like to convey our support to the committee and the legislature for working to expand broadband access across rural Nebraska. The NREA represents 34 rural public power districts and electric cooperatives throughout the state. More than 1,000 dedicated employees of our system serve 240,000 meters across 90,000 miles of line. As we all know, and as has been stated, in 2022, LB 1024 provided $40 million of federal coronavirus capital projects funds to the 3rd Congressional District of Nebraska. Unlike other funds that have been received and administered through the state's Broadband Bridge Act, these funds do not require any match from the broadband provider. Unfortunately, 1024 included a limitation that restricted the funds to be used in only cities of the second class and villages. LB 412 relaxes this restriction and includes funding for any portion of a local exchange that includes a city of the second class or village. As Nebraska begins to see millions of dollars come to our state for broadband deployment, NREA's greatest concern is that once these funds are all spent, rural Nebraska will be left without broadband. True rural development outside city limits and high-cost unserved locations should be the primary target of these funds. If broadband service is brought to rural municipalities without a plan to reach beyond city limits, rural development may never be realized. LB 412 moves us all in the right direction. I want to thank the committee for their time and their sincere efforts to move rural broadband across Nebraska. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Further supporters?
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Moser, Transportation Committee. My name is Dan Watermeyer, spelled Watermeier. I'm here to testify in support of LB 412. Since LB 1024 was passed last year, the Commission has heard from many broadband service providers that they are concerned about the restriction on grant funding in the 3rd Congressional District. As the statute is currently written, capital projects funds can only be awarded for broadband development in cities of the second class and villages. The restriction prevents the Commission from awarding funds in the most rural parts of western Nebraska where broadband is desperately needed. LB 412 remedies this issue by allowing the Commission to award funds on a county-by-county or an exchange basis. We think this is an improvement to the statute as currently written and would encourage the timely passage of LB 412 so that the Commission can expand the territory eligible for capital project funds awards. We do ask the committee to consider the potential implementation dates that should this bill pass, since there is a grant cycle underway right now, and the Commission expects to make awards for this cycle at the end of June of 2023. That ends my testimony.
Okay, questions for Mr. Watermeyer? Seeing none, thank you. There are further people testifying in support? Further testifiers in support? Okay, are there negative testifiers in opposition to this bill? Seeing none, how about neutral? Is there testimony in the neutral?
Good afternoon. My name is Lash, L-A-S-H Chaffin, C-H-A-F-F-I-N, representing the League of Nebraska Municipalities. I'm going to be very quick, but I do have a couple additional pieces of information that may be useful to the committee. First, we can't testify in favor of this because it's really bad job security to say, oh, take away a fund that's dedicated to second-class cities and villages. But that said, we understand the policy behind this bill. And I will say the league did not ask to have these funds dedicated to cities of the second class and villages. And from, at least as near as I can tell, as far back as April, we were telling our members the intent of this fund is, here's how we worded it. And this may not be exactly correct, but we worded it as the intent of this fund was to go to anywhere in the 3rd district that was unserved or underserved that wasn't in a city of the 1st class. So, and that was based on conversations with Senator Friesen at the time. So that said, we did not ask for this money to be isolated, and we understand the big picture, and our committees that talk about this, one of their examples they use all the time is it's important to get broadband to, in addition to having it in the village, it's just as important, and maybe more important in some ways, to have it out at the Morton building that's housing the $400,000 combine. That's equally important to Nebraska. We need to have broadband everywhere. So that said, as in a neutral capacity, if you quickly move this measure forward, we will not stand in your way.
Okay, questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Chaffin. Anybody else to speak in neutral? Seeing none? And Senator Geist waives her closing. That will conclude our hearing. We'll be back at 1:30. Thank you.